It is 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. And once again, our attention is drawn inexorably to a conversation about immigration. I say inexorably, and I mean it. It's how the news works. But as I get older, I find myself increasingly frustrated by how the news works. Are there any other contexts in which the bleatings of Jonathan Gullis would be headline news? There's absolutely no criticism whatsoever of our bulletins or indeed anybody else's. But, I mean, can you imagine, really, any other context in which a complete flump like Jonathan Gullis or 30p Lee would merit so much attention? But I know what you're thinking. Well, don't give them any attention then. And it's tempting not to give them any attention. There are 165,000 care workers. Vacancies, I beg your pardon, currently in the care sector. But Gullis and Anderson want to make it harder for people to come here to work in our care sector. They've issued a 12-point plan, which is fascinating for two reasons. Number one, looking at some of them, I am surprised they can count up as far as 12. And the other reason is, have a look around. 13 years in power, you've recalibrated the immigration conversation so often, and it just doesn't work. And yet, the calculation clearly from these 25 Tories is that by trying to make the discourse more divisive, more hate-filled, more horrible, they will possibly be able to hang on to their seats come the election. And he said revolution then. If some of the predictions are correct, it may begin to look like a revolution. But here's the reason why. We can't look away. That reason, quite possibly, is you. I only recently realised, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, to be honest with you. Not massively embarrassed. We all do our best. None of us are perfect. But I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit that I only recently realised that we've never really looked at this issue through the other end of the telescope. I've been pretty good over the years at pointing out the bigotry and hypocrisy and dishonesty of people who pretend that immigration is somehow the source of all our ills, and the billionaire newspaper owners and their pocket politicians are all just innocent victims of the tofu-eating wokerati or the blob or the anti-growth coalition or the woke mob. I don't know who's getting the blame this week. They've moved on to the establishment now. I saw Jake Berry, a former chairman of the Conservative Party, with a knighthood, criticising the establishment the other day. What do you do when a knighted former chairman of the Tory party starts criticising the establishment? Where exactly? I mean, who are you supposed to be getting angry with? Is it Gary Lineker and Carol Vorderman again? Good God, those two carry a lot of weight, don't they, when it comes to the responsibility for all of our country's ills that have absolutely nothing to do with the people that have been running the place for the last 13 years. But when I say we've looked at it through the wrong end of the telescope, I mean, what on earth must it feel like to turn on your radio again today and hear people like Jonathan Gullis and 30p Lee Anderson essentially saying they'd rather you weren't here? That's what this debate is about. That's what this conversation consists of. That's the context that they are either too thick to understand or too nasty to care about. That is what you hear when you turn on your radio or open your newspapers. I guess you could go in two directions. You could become a sort of Suella Braverman type character and insist, no, they don't mean people like me or my parents. It's nothing to do with us. We hate the newcomers just as much as everybody else does. We dream of deporting them, you might say. But for normal people, for emotionally secure people, it must just be horrible. It must just be horrible. Turn on your radio today and you've got Jonathan Gullis, 30p Lee and a bunch of others. They're led by someone called Tom Hunt, which is a new one on me, insisting that we need to have fewer people here. Looking at the cost of living crisis, energy, interest rates, huge vacancies across so many sectors, cost of food driven up, of course, by a shortage of labour, among other factors, and deciding that the trick here, the secret here, the magic beans for our electoral success is to turn people born here even more against people not born here, because you don't get to distinguish, do you? You don't. Oh, I don't mean you, they said the morning after the referendum result. I voted to get rid of them, but I didn't mean you. You don't get to make those distinctions, I'm afraid, if you're on the receiving end of it, do you? You don't go, oh, that's all right, then they don't mean me. I am an immigrant and I am here working in the care sector or any other so-called shortage occupation lists. And therefore, yes, but I know they don't mean me. I know they don't mean me. No one knows they don't. How do you explain it to your children? You're sitting in the car this morning. I do this sometimes. Not the explaining it to my children bit. I don't know what the broader tides of immigration are at the moment. My anecdotal experience is that jobs that were done until relatively recently by Eastern European people in my orbit, alongside British people, are now being done by Asian people. I think I'm seeing in some sort of areas of life, I'm seeing more people who come from the subcontinent than people who come from Eastern Europe. That would fit, wouldn't it, with the broader figures that we're seeing. West Africa as well, the broader figures that we're seeing, that would fit. And sometimes I play a little game. I try to imagine what it would be like if it made me angry, right? Or if it made me scared. I try to imagine what it would be like to feel scared if the person working in the care home where you visit your mum, or the person working in the supermarket where you do your shopping, if their identity made you angry or scared. I always remember, you would expect me at this point to refer to a caller from a few years ago who explained in some detail why they'd voted to leave the European Union because there were too many brown faces in their local Tesco. I often think of him. I often wonder how he's doing at the moment with the changing face of the UK, of Brexit Britain. And what would that be like? What would that be like? For me, it would be like having a problem with someone whose hair was ginger or who had freckles. Or if we made everybody wear a badge denoting what their star sign was, being absolutely fine with the Pisces, putting your shopping through the till, but furious if it was a Capricorn. I mean, it's meaningless in the great scheme of things, but it's so effective, isn't it? People can be so easily turned into or turned towards profound unpleasantness. And who wins? Who benefits from this? You develop a problem with your neighbours because some of them were born somewhere else. Who wins? You don't win, they don't win. Who wins? Well, arguably the people who have done a little bit more to create the problems from which you are currently suffering. The people who are trying to blame their own missteps and incompetences on tofu-eating woke hurrah, they win. So who would you expect to lead an attack upon immigration today? Obviously, the thickest 25 Tory MPs in Parliament. It's like night following day. Show me a thick Tory with fears about losing their seat in the next election, and I'll show you someone reaching for the immigration scaremongering lever like a rat up a drain pipe. Goes with the territory. Maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe they're not actually all thick. Maybe some of them are just preternaturally unpleasant. But it's such an odd thing to be doing now. We became the first country in history to impose economic sanctions on itself because people had been persuaded that too many people were coming here from the European continent. So they stopped coming. We've tried to fill some of the gaps, but we're failing, which is why there are currently 165,000 vacancies in the care sector. Would you come on a 3-year or a 5-year visa, knowing that if you wanted to put down roots, start a family, put children in school, anything like that, you'd have the rug ripped from beneath your feet 3 or 5 years down the line, treating human beings like a sort of negotiable commodity as opposed to freedom of movement, which allows people to do what they please, where they please, spend their money on what they want, apply for jobs where they want. It's just bizarre that they're still doing it. 12-point plan to cut net migration by about 400,000 before the next election. Well, let's hope that Vladimir Putin doesn't invade anywhere else, because, of course, one of the reasons why our numbers are high net at the moment is because of the number of Ukrainians that have made their way here. And hearing Gullis talk about the economically inactive, I suppose loosely describe him as cerebrally inactive, but these are not people sitting there going, oh, I can't be bothered to go to work today. They're people with health conditions, people with issues, people with lifestyle choices in some cases, people who've taken early retirement, people who've got their pot and they've decided to step back from the fray, people who recalibrated their own priorities during lockdown. But I don't want to talk about them, and I don't want to really talk about these flotsam and jetsam of the political class, trying even now, 13 years in power, with immigration having propelled us over the Brexit cliff edge and pushed people like Boris Johnson into Parliament. Even now, they say, we've just got to be nastier. We've just got to be nastier and everything will be fine. I want to know what it's like when you think that they're talking about you. Another morning where you turn on your radio and they're talking about not wanting you to be here. Imagine being on the bus this morning with your earphones in, listening to a conversation, on your bus, on the way to a shift, on your way home. Let's really go for the Technicolor picture here. Or you're on your way home from a shift in a care home. You've just had 12 hours of back-breakingly hard work. The home is understaffed. You're doing more work than you should be doing. Some of the patients are in a right old state. The heat makes everything worse. You haven't got air conditioning. Some of them practically need hosing down. In some cases, literally. And you're on your way home on the bus. Earphone in, radio on. 25 Tory MPs don't want any more foreigners coming here to work in care homes. How's that going to make you feel? How is that going to make you feel? And of course, it's not just care homes. We might be talking about so-called low-skilled, although frankly, Jonathan Gullis and 30p Lee Anderson describing anybody else as low-skilled is probably the definition, the closest you'll ever come to a pure definition of irony. It's not just low-skilled, is it? Because that's another needle, another very movable, a perforated line. Low-skilled today, high-skilled tomorrow, no-skilled on Tuesday. What does it even mean? I couldn't put a shift in picking fruit, could you? I couldn't even begin to get close to the kind of numbers that you'd need to be doing to hang on to your job or to be of use to the farmer. I don't think I could do a shift in a care home. I could probably learn that. I'd be physically capable of it, but I don't know whether I'd be emotionally suitable to that sort of work. Low-skilled, no-skilled. And then Anderson and Gullis come along, casting aspersions on the people currently doing the work for the crime of having been born somewhere else. How does it make you feel? Okay? A couple of you have asked me to check that there are actually 12 points in this plan. I think there are. Tightening restrictions on student visas to stop graduates staying in the UK for longer than 2 years without a job offer. How many people are in that category at the moment? You'd need to tell me that before I could have a view on it. Capping the number of refugees legally accepted for resettlement. Good God. Good God. Imagine if we'd done that. Well, actually, we kind of did do that in the 1930s and the 1940s, but this lot want to go back to that. Doesn't matter where you're fleeing from, doesn't matter what you're running away from. You can't come here. You're not on the list. You're not coming in. 20,000. That would include, of course, Ukrainians in recent years. A 5% cap on the amount of social housing that councils can give to non-UK nationals doesn't even mean anything. Build more social housing. Causing resentment by allocation according to need as opposed to ethnicity or demographics. It's incredible. And then if you are working in the care sector for close to minimum wage, this lot want to charge you £2,700 a year just to use the NHS. In fact, if you're working in the NHS on close to minimum wage, this lot want you to pay £2,700 to be treated by your colleagues while they continue to get it for free. So let's just remember why we have to talk about this stuff. Because look, come here, I'd much rather not. That it is one of the why are we giving them the oxygen of attack? The answer is you. The answer is if we don't remind ourselves what real people are and look like and do, they can continue to do what they did in the run-up to Brexit and portray these people as unreal. These faceless mobs, the characters in Daily Mail stories or Nigel Farage's disgusting Nazi-themed posters. The real people that are currently looking after your mum. The real people that are currently making sure there is some food on the shelves in our supermarkets. The real people who are currently dealing with all of the things that the rest of us are dealing with a fat side order of hatred and demonisation. As an immigrant, and I wish I had a better word, I can't keep saying as somebody who was born somewhere. Yes, I can. Of course I can. As somebody who was born somewhere else, how do you feel when you hear Jonathan Gullis, 30p Lee, and the rest of them explaining why you should not be here at all? 0345 6060 973. And if you would like this morning to make a case for being of more use to British society than Jonathan Gullis or 30p Lee Anderson, then this is the place to do it. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't think it would be very hard. I don't think it would be very hard for you to explain why you believe your contribution to British society is greater than that of Jonathan Gullis and 30p Lee Anderson combined. I believe he spent the weekend trying to feed cat food to a woman that used to be on The Apprentice. I may have misunderstood the headline on a social media clip, but frankly, I doubt it. So what's it like when these stories, when these political exacerbations, what's it like? What does it feel like when you're listening to it, reading it, watching it, and realising that actually, whichever way you dice it, they do mean you? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. It is 22 minutes after 10, and it is a question that we have not asked enough over the years. What is it like when you turn on your radio or open your newspaper and there they are, talking about you, 30p Lee Anderson, Jonathan Gullis, someone called Miriam Cates, who seems to be gathering a little bit of profile at the moment, all suggesting that the people working in care homes or the people on the shortage occupation lists shouldn't be here. Instead, I don't know, we should be chasing people out of their own homes and forcing them into these jobs instead. Why? Might ask that question later, but we begin this morning with the question of what it's like when you realise they mean you. 0345 6060 973. Alex is in Aldershot. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi. So I'm Eastern European, and my baby's shouting for me, so I probably won't be too long. But obviously,
that's not a figure of speech. You have actually got a baby.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Where are you from originally, Alex?
I was born in Hungary,
okay.
But when I checked my genetics, just for in context of the whole Brexit thing, most of my genes are not from Hungary. But that's also to do historically with the fact that Hungary is in this geopolitical location where we were attacked a lot, and we were so few that at one point in our history, or maybe more, I don't know, because I found history so confusing, because depending on whether the Russians were in power or not, history always changed. So I kind of lost interest. But I do remember that much, that we lost so many of our people that we had to ask neighboring countries to move in. Hence, I am everything and not really Hungarian, you know?
Of course.
So there we go. Where, am I Hungarian? To a Brexiteer I am, but mainly a bloody foreigner, as I've been called a few times. And my point is that some foreigners, or most, the point is that I feel like this government is using this chat to create emotions, get those emotions going, just like around Brexit, and get the votes they need to survive, which is a very pathetic attempt to survive, frankly. When all you got is hate in order to unite people, then you really lost your game, and you should look inside and think again. But that's the reality. And being an Eastern European, what I find difficult is that the label of being Eastern European is not illegal and is used in a negative context. And no matter how much you try to respect the country you live in, adapt, and be a useful, kind, do your best for everyone around you, you still get these labels. And frankly, I moved here in 2007, and for a while I moved away. I worked in the Arctic Circle just to get away from hearing that I take British jobs away.
How does it reach your ears? How do you? I mean, so I know how the news works. I know that today you're essentially hearing from people like Gullis and Anderson and Cates that they don't really want you here. So I know how the news works. How does it work on the ground, as it were, Alex? How does it work in your daily life, if indeed it does?
It's not news. I feel like this was always the case. We used to play a game with my boyfriend and now husband that how many pages do we have to flip in the papers to find the first anti-foreigner article? And this definitely goes back to 2010 at least.
Yes. But
we probably played this game earlier than that. And
And how does it impact on you? I mean, you mentioned people calling you a bloody foreigner, so the rhetoric reaches you in very real ways.
Yeah, in very human ways as well. I work in healthcare, and I know.
Oh, go on, losing the line. I don't know whether you're ministering to the baby. You work in healthcare. To be honest, you don't need to say any more than that. You work in healthcare, you're turning on your radio today and hearing politicians who, not long ago, were insisting that we can't afford pay rises for people, or that if you need to use a food bank, you should be living on porridge, suggesting that you shouldn't be here at all. Thank you, Alex. Take care. Make sure she's all right, will you? Just and that she knows that she was heard. Amelia is in Hereford. Amelia, what would you like to say?
James, hello again.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well. What's on your mind?
I'm calling because I'm feeling increasingly, I think about it. I used to be a very person. When I came to this country over, it will be 19 years ago, exactly. Yes. On the 9th of July, I will be having this anniversary, which I was always celebrating up until 2016.
Yes.
Very happily, because my own country kind of rejected me. So when I graduated in Poland at university, the unemployment rate over there was 58%.
Gosh.
We couldn't work in our professions. I was a qualified teacher. My husband was, the then boyfriend, husband now, was a civil administration worker. So we couldn't find jobs in our professions at all. So there were only jobs maybe available as a waiter, yes. Maybe a sales assistant. But they were so badly paid that my dad had to buy me a pair of shoes so I could go basically to work. We couldn't even afford food to put it on the table at the end of the month. So the situation was dire. And then we decided to come to this country. And my personal journey was, somebody said that I probably should write it up, because we came to this country with no English whatsoever. Basically, I could speak maybe, 10 words and a couple of sentences. We had £100 in our pocket, borrowed money, of course.
Yes.
We had a one-way ticket, because we knew ourselves and we knew that any disappointment, any rejection, and we will be on our way back. So we thought, no, we have to do it properly. And we didn't have any jobs here. We didn't have anybody. We were just determined that we want to work and we can do anything. We will be able to find a job. So we basically got to Herefordshire only because the friends of ours used to come here as students to work on the farms.
Yes.
And we were hitchhiking, walking, using buses with no knowledge of the local area, of people, of nothing. And wild camping, meaning sleeping rough with a tent, to sleeping bags and a bag of food for 2 weeks, looking for a job. And I found it terrifying and absolutely exciting at the same time, because I thought we will either make it or I don't know. I had no idea actually what we were doing, but I would have never done it again, basically.
Well, I think it's a young person's game, Amelia, whatever else we might say about it.
Yes.
Go on.
Yeah, no. You can only do it when you are desperate, I guess.
Yes,
and we found those jobs on the farm. Initially, it was just cutting the grass under the cider apple trees.
Yes.
We were working on that farm for over a year, doing all sorts of back-breaking jobs, sorting potatoes. Unbelievably hard work. But because I come from a small household in Poland, I was used to that hard labor and graft.
Sure.
So that didn't bother and faze us. Then we found a job in a local pub, so moved on to hospitality, worked in several pubs. I'm pretty good at cooking, I guess. So as most good Polish girls were, And so, and then I started volunteering in the local schools when my English picked up in a Catholic school, helping Polish kids to get better.
Oh, yeah.
And then I got 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, eventually part-time, full-time job over there as a teaching assistant, bilingual TA.
Yes.
And then I applied to the local council for the same job. So I was working as a specialist bilingual TA for the entire county. And I had left that job 9 years ago because we started our own business, catering business. We became quite successful, got to the top 3 of the BBC Food and Farming Awards for the best street food in the country. We didn't win it though. And now, and now I work as a postie, and we still run our own business. So the journey was long, and I was quite happy alongside this journey up until, as I told you, 2016, when things really bitter. And I guess I was kind of shielded from most of the underlying racism, and because my jobs working for the schools, etc. My colleagues were always very nice. Nobody ever called me a bloody foreigner. But my husband, my brother, my colleagues from my friends from other places, they had those incidents when things were becoming really nasty.
Yeah.
And then after 2016, yes, there were people who said, "Oh, I don't mean you, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, I voted for Brexit, but no, it has nothing to do with you. You are the good one. You work, but there are those mythical Eastern Europeans who just simultaneously are stealing our jobs and are on the dole." Yeah. So, and I have become very bitter ever since. And now it's becoming even worse. And I had this situation not so long ago. It had nothing to do with those awful Tory people now.
Sure.
But it had something to do with the coronation, because I'm very vocal about politics. I post a lot about things. And I only posted this it's not my king, which I have every right to say. So I'm a Republican. So reaction met with, and the argumentation that, oh yes, I don't know,
second class citizenship. You can live here, you can pay taxes, but you don't have freedom of speech. And of course, the people attacking you will be the ones who claim every day that freedom of speech is precious and sacrosanct and under threat from the tofu-eating wokerati. You've made me 4 minutes late for the news. I'll give you another. It's your prerogative. I'll give you another 30 seconds. Just on a day like today, you turn your radio on, and are they talking about? Is Miriam Cates talking about you?
She does. She does, most certainly, and me very bitter, and this feeling of dread and feeling kind of uprooted again, because I want to feel that it is my country. Those people make me feel like it.
Well, don't. There's more like me than like her. All right?
No, I know. There are good people who I love. They love me, and but it feels really difficult.
And here it comes again. Yeah. I suspect that you and many people in situations similar to yours, and thank you for telling your story in such detail. I think every syllable matters. Must have probably hoped that it would go back down again. And I still think it is. It's just on days like today you see the appetite for restoking these fires, restoking these planes. This Miriam Cates woman saying that we need to cut off the supply of cheap foreign labour and encourage British people to fill jobs in the care sector. How the hell do they think that's going to work? They don't think, do they? Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 10:38 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think this is real, so we'll pop him in Idiot's Corner. This is Dylan. If you wanted to feel like your country, he writes, you pledge allegiance to the throne and the flag. Well, you don't, actually, mate. If you want to put on social media that is not your king, you are deluded, absolutely deluded. You came to this country because your country was no good. Our country is great because of our king, because of our government, because we are better. Be more respectful of the house you're in, says Dylan in Hereford, who is this week's first entry in Idiot's Corner. I'm doing something a bit different later, 12:30. I don't know how it'll work. Might be a massive disaster. We'll see. The Shadow Education Secretary, a lot of education stories in the news at the moment. The Shadow Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, will join me at 12:30. Beg your pardon, Bridget Phillipson will join me at 12:30 to take your calls. The opposite number, of course, is Gillian Keegan. If there is something you would like, well, we can't use the phones now. What can people do? Do you want to just be aware, all right, and then hit the numbers at 12:30 like it's mystery hour. Something you'd like to put to Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Education Secretary and Labour MP for Houghton and Sunderland South, in the studio taking your calls. Some of the areas that they have responsibility for, obviously early years and childcare. Free schools, you've noticed, perhaps schools are falling apart, all sorts of problems in the sector, none of which will be solved by limiting the number of people that can come into work in care homes. But that is today's top priority for at least 25 Tory MPs, including one called Miriam Cates, who has been explaining all morning that you need to stop temporary visas for care workers in order to force employers to look at recruiting local young people. Some mornings I'd say, will that work? Later today, I might say, will that work? Later today, I might say, is there anybody with a fully functioning brain who thinks that this is a good idea? But no, what we're doing first is looking at the people that this story is about, not the people that this story is designed to enrage and inflame or just to disappoint deeply. Talking about the people being used as weapons, as pawns, as collateral damage. The people who hear stories like this and don't think about them, they think about themselves. Ruby's in Heald Green. Ruby, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank
Hello.
you for taking my call.
Very welcome.
I'm a little bit upset and sad about this conversation. Yeah. And I'd just like to explain why. Because my dad came to this country in the 1960s because they required people to work in the mills. So he came here to the country legally, and so did my mum. I'm of an Asian background, and sometimes when I hear these conversations, and I'm wondering, who are they actually directing this to?
Who are they talking about?
Yes, because I am from an immigrant family, even though I was born in this country. I will be 55 this year. So I listen to these conversations and I think, are you talking about people who are coming to the country? Are you talking about people who have settled here? And I get very upset when they talk about low skill as well. Even though my father came to work in the mills, it's the fact that you required a workforce to work in the mills. Yeah. And they seem to think that the situation is static, but the situation isn't static because, I'm one of 5 children and we are all professionals and we all work in professional backgrounds. We have an engineer, we have a solicitor, we have a civil servant.
You don't have to justify yourself to me.
No, but what I'm saying is the fact that now my children, or my daughter is a doctor who works in the NHS now. My niece is a 4th-year medical student. My other niece will start medical school. The other children will also go into professions as well. And when we had the Brexit vote, then I turned around and I said to my family, we're not safe in this country anymore. I heard a story once that the Jewish population always have a suitcase packed and ready to go.
Yes.
And I said to my family, we need to have suitcases ready and packed to leave. And when we do that, we will be taking our children with us. So therefore, that skilled background that you actually want as well as a low skill, and I don't know what they mean by low skill, will be leaving the country as well. It's because all of this rhetoric has made us feel very unsafe in the country. I mean, it doesn't matter how many generations we will live here. I'm a proud British Pakistani and I will always have an immigrant background. It will never change, no matter how many of our children are born in this country. And the other thing with this rhetoric is it always goes up a step. And I always think about the Ugandan Asians when I hear this rhetoric. And I was thinking, what is the final step? Is the final step to actually expel every person of colour from the country?
Well, yes. I mean, you know it is. You've seen the National Front posters from the 1970s, which you talked about doing precisely that. The sort of Enoch Powell school of thought, which enjoys some support at the posher end of the British magazine market. But I mean, in the same way that you will always be British Pakistani, you will always have an immigrant heritage. I wonder whether it is inevitable and unavoidable that some people will therefore look at you as other, as different. Do you see what I mean? I don't know. Can you have one without the other?
That's the bit that I don't understand. I mean,
it's the bit I don't understand either.
Why do we have to keep proving ourselves? And why?
Well, I don't know. And some people don't feel.
Come in, even from Eastern Europeans having to prove themselves all the time. We live in this country. We abide by the rules. We understand the system. We pay our taxes. Why can we never be a person of colour? I mean, I don't like that phrase, but why can we not be British and a person of colour? Yeah. It seems to me that some people can't accept that situation.
Well, they don't want to, do they? I mean, this bit here today's quite a dark day, isn't it, actually? Because I thought some of this was in abeyance. You'd have thought that having voted to take back control, seeing the absolute necessity of high levels of immigration just to keep the country chugging along, even in the state it's in at the moment, would have silenced, at least for a while, this corner of political rhetoric. But here she is. You need to cut off the supply of cheap foreign labour, which is your dad back in the day, and encourage British people to fill jobs in the care sector. I presume they were saying that about the mills and the factories in the 50s, were they, Ruby? I don't know. I presume that this is what Enoch Powell was getting his knickers in a twist about back in the day, and it just comes back round again. I don't know that I can say anything to you now. I can say to Amelia, there are more people like me than there are people like Jonathan Gullis. You know that that's true. You know that most people live in societies now where they are more likely than not to know families with a background like yours and to count them among their friends. And yet this thing that can't be removed, this nugget of difference, it will always be there, but it doesn't always have to be bad. That's the thing, isn't it? People come along and they take your identity and they turn it into a stick with which to beat you. And they do it by implying that you shouldn't be here at all. And do you think it works still? Do you think it works like it worked in 2016?
If they didn't think it didn't work, then they won't be using it.
No, but they are a spectacularly stupid bunch of people, Ruby. Spectacularly stupid. Enoch Powell was close to a genius. You know, him getting something to work is very different from Jonathan Gullis getting something to work. Timing, context, opportunity, rhetoric. They're rubbish at all of it, this lot. I hope I'm right. Obviously, you do too. But if I'm wrong, it's not me that gets it in the neck, is it?
No, it will be people like me.
Thank you, Ruby. I suppose you could. A few people bringing the Irish heritage into it in the inbox, saying that they can remember what it was like. So the spotlight shifts, but it never focuses oddly on white Americans, does it? Funny that. Where was Boris Johnson born? It's 10:47. It's 9 minutes to 11. I had to check then. Don't know why. It's 9 minutes to 11, definitely. For at least another 20 seconds. What's the correct word for this? Clickbait. I was going to come back and say I'm being bombarded by Geordies because I mispronounced Bridget Phillipson's constituency. I called it Houghton. Instead of, as every fool knows, she is the MP for Houghton and Sunderland South. But by saying I've been bombarded by Geordies, I would have been deliberately, by confusing Sunderland with Middlesbrough, I would have been deliberately trying to get a response. And I do wonder sometimes how much of what people like 30p Lee and Miriam Cates and Jonathan Gullis do? How much of it is simply designed to get a response? Are they too stupid to understand what will happen to our care homes if you stop people coming from overseas to work in them? Or is it all about the response? So I say, I've been bombarded by Geordies after getting that thing about Sunderland wrong, and my inbox would go boom with people saying, we're not Geordies, man. Everyone knows that people from Sunderland are called smoggies. No, they're not. That's Middlesbrough. Mackems. That's actually true. But do you see what I mean? Do you see how easy it would be to get a sort of small bonfire of responses burning? I do. I just wonder about that stuff occasionally. Anyway, the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, will be with me from 12:30. So get your questions ready for that, please. Penny is in Sissinghurst in Kent. Penny, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Penny.
Morning. I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
It's only me. Don't be nervous.
Well, I work in the care sector.
Oh, yeah.
And I work with dementia, end of life, and palliative care.
Thank
I'm
you.
a white, ageing British woman. I'm 62 now. And the majority of my colleagues that I work with,
Yes.
I would say 87% of them, from my colleagues and my friends.
87%?
Yes.
Could we be more precise, please?
87% of my colleagues
Yes.
and friends that I work with come from Asia.
Right.
I would say probably 7% come from Africa and Eastern
Right.
European, and the rest are British.
Okay, gosh.
If we stop people coming over to this country to look after our ageing and elderly, sick relatives, family, friends, the whole place will close down and we'll have nothing. We will have absolutely no care at all. That will be the end of it.
Well, I can tell you that Miriam Cates disagrees because she thinks that this will force I'll quote this, I want to get this right. It would force employers to look at recruiting local young people, Penny, so you don't need to worry.
That's absolute rubbish. Recently, I work part-time. I'm what they call an social activity coordinator.
Oh, yeah.
Recently, we put an advertisement in for the other part of my job, so that we had a full-time carer working on our dementia unit.
Yes.
It's taken a year to recruit somebody. That's how awkward it is with recruiting people. A year. That's recruiting obviously in the local magazines.
It's just not. Well, Jonathan Gullis told me told Nick, I think, that there are 5 million people out there who are, to use his words, economically inactive. So we just need to find one of them, wouldn't we, Penny?
We would, and I have to say that the colleagues that I work with, and I want to call them friends and colleagues.
Yes.
My husband has his own mum is in a dementia unit in London.
Okay.
And that's what took me down this step. I've been here a year and a half now, after seeing my mother-in-law and the care that she was given in the care home where she is. I was semi-retired, and I thought, you know what, I'm just sitting at home, I'm doing my housework day to day, there's something more I can do. And that's why I went into care.
That's lovely.
Because they'd given so much to my mother-in-law and looked after her so well, I decided that I wanted to do some of that. But it's the pay is minimum.
Sure.
It's minimum pay. We're our people that come over, our friends and colleagues, they're sponsored by our company.
Yes.
I work for an amazing company. I can't say the name, but it's absolutely amazing.
That's good to know.
They look after their friends and colleagues. We're treated well. We don't earn the best money. It's something you've got to want to do. It's a difficult job.
What's going on then? How do you? I don't know whether you'll talk about this at work or not. I presume it'd be an uncomfortable conversation for many of your friends and colleagues. But what's going on? These people are elected politicians. They've had an education. They presumably know which way is up and which way is down. And she reckons that in the sector where you work, it would be really easy to get lots of local people to come in, or lots of people who are semi-retired like you were, or somehow don't know. So like there's 5 million people out there who would love to do what you've done but don't know how to go about doing it. I don't get. I mean, when you see a spark plug when you see one of those things and a spark goes from one bit to the other?
Yeah.
I don't see where the spark goes here. They have the thought, and then the spark just what are they thinking? Do we know, Penny? Do we know?
Well, I'd like them to come and work with us just for a day.
That's a great idea. Come along.
You know, I think if they came and worked with us for a day, they might go away and rewrite everything they've just said because it's absolute rubbish. People, I live in the country, small villages. There is quite a lot of unemployment in some of the villages, but we never ever get young people or even retired people wanting to return back to work.
Yes.
They don't apply for these jobs.
There's the last bit there, Penny. You've just brilliantly highlighted it. Why, if your mum's getting looked after well, if the people you're caring for are being looked after well, what sort of person looks through the window of your care home and sees someone being really well looked after, whether it's by you or whether it's by one of your friends and colleagues from Asia or Africa or wherever it may be? These people look through the window of the care home and they see your... What's the word? What word do you use? I nearly said inmates. What's the right word to use, Penny? Patients, is it? Residents. Residents. I'm glad I didn't say inmates out loud. That would have made me look like a right old idiot. So they look through the window of your care home and they see you and your colleagues looking after the residents. And they think, oh, that's all right. We like Penny. She can carry on doing this. But that fella over there looks a bit brown. We don't want him here. What's going through their tiny heads?
Oh, they're just very small-minded people.
I think you must be right.
It hits people more when this happens to them, unfortunately. When you have a relative or a loved one that needs to go into a home because they no longer can look after themselves or they're very sick.
Yeah, that's it. That's the question. Do these people, does Lee Anderson take his dad into a home and think, oh, flipping heck, I can't believe he's been so well looked after by foreigners. That's terrible.
Yeah.
I'm really cross about that. I'd much rather frog marched some layabouts hanging outside the local chippy into here and got them to look after him instead. It just doesn't make sense.
If this goes ahead...
what happens if it goes ahead? What happens?
In even more problems than we are now because there'll be more people having to give up work to care for their elderly.
Oh, what a great point. Yeah, God.
Yeah, and it's going to cost the government millions, billions, quadrillions, whatever you want to call it.
Great word. Quadrillions is my favourite. Quadrillions.
Because who's going to look after these people?
Who's going to come in and do it?
Who's going to come and look after them? Are they going to give up their jobs?
How bizarre.
And then we'll be looking for more people. And then we'll be back to square one, where we have we have loads of jobs, no people to fill them, and guess who we'll turn to?
People from overseas.
Exactly.
And we'll call it liberty of motion, Penny.
Yes, that's right.
Which is nothing like freedom of movement.
No, I just think that these people need to come and...
Just a simple way of putting it. Because they're always banging on about how out of touch their critics are, and they're the ones who know about the concerns of ordinary people and what it's really like outside the metropolitan elite. Get yourselves down to Sissinghurst. Penny will show you around, and then explain to the people currently working there why they shouldn't be, and the people not working there why they should be. And good luck finding the people who aren't working there to explain to them why they should be. That's the point, isn't it? That's the point. You look through the window of a care home, you see a resident being well looked after, and you get cross because the carer was born somewhere else. I don't understand that mindset, and I'm not sure I ever will. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Vacancies in hospitality currently running at about 150,000, Natasha tells me, with many of them closed as low-skilled by the government, which means they're not even on the approved list and can't recruit from the EU. Few Brits want to take these positions. Well, and of course the jobs are endorsed, encouraged and respected at the highest level by royal patronage, but not by the party of business. Why is this right-wing rhetoric being allowed to destroy our country? I wonder, actually, and I don't know whether this will work, because the kind of people that can answer this question tend not to ring me anymore. I think the fear of going viral has finally penetrated their rather well-insulated skulls. I could be wrong, and I don't really mean you, actually, because that would mean that you still hate immigration. Because a lot of people for a while told me, when the numbers came in and they were much higher than they were before Brexit, a lot of people told me, that's great. I don't regret Brexit at all because we just have better control now. And that's what I voted for. And I give you the benefit of the doubt. I believe you. You didn't want a reduction in overall numbers. You wanted to send them back where they came from, but also welcome more people from where they came from than were coming here before, but with a feeling of control, which is a bit like sovereignty, isn't it? It feels great. You can't tell me what it is, but it feels great. But I would like to examine whether or not this works. That John Hayes bloke is on the list. Is he the one that Sir Braverman accidentally sent the email to? I think Brendan Clark-Smith, inevitably. Brendan Clark-Smith achieves the, frankly, unbelievable feat of making Jonathan Gullis look clever, which is remarkable, given that Jonathan Gullis achieves the, frankly, remarkable feat of making a watermelon look intelligent. So there's quite a little hierarchy of intellectual clout there. Also, what's the deputy chairman doing? Undermining the leadership in this way. The reason I'm just thinking out loud. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm looking at the 12. I've got 10 of the 12. It goes up to 12 apparently, although it's perfectly possible they only got as far as 10 and then ran out of pencil. But I think this is the closest I've seen since Farage was in his pomp to a sort of explicit admission that you just don't like foreigners. Despite, in his case, of course, being married to one. Do you remember when he started talking about people speaking foreign on trains? And you'd sort of be like, well, how do you know it's not their first language? How do you know that they're not fluent in English as well? You know, what language does your wife? I remember asking, what language does your wife speak to your children at home? I presume it's German. And he said, do you know what he said? He said, well, I don't think they talk it on trains. I just thought, this man's absolutely ridiculous. But and then we'd sort of step back a bit. The referendum result went over the line, and we sort of stepped back a bit from the worst sort of demonisations, the worst sort of otherings. And now it's coming back. Some of the stuff here is grim. So this one here, raise the minimum combined income threshold for sponsoring a spouse and raise the minimum language requirement. So that's just cruel, isn't it? You fall in love with someone. We spoke to Amelia earlier. She had 10 words of English by her own account when she started here. Sleeping in a tent, went to work in the fields, the fruit fields of Herefordshire. Now she combines her work as an award-winning caterer. She came third, that's still an award, as an award-winning caterer with her work as a post person, a post woman. But she wouldn't have been allowed in at all with a higher minimum language requirement. I mean, hand on heart, would 30p Lee pass a rigorous language test, a rigorous English language test? And I think it's about £18,600 now that you have to provide evidence of income in order to bring your husband or your wife to this country. If you fell in love on holiday, well, even if you were British, that just looks cruel. We need to make it. You see, we just need to make it harder for foreigners to come here. It comes from a starting point, which, if you're generous, would be there are too many. There are genuinely too many. I've got no problem with any of them on a personal level, but there are just too many of them, to which the response would be 150,000 vacancies in hospitality, 165,000 vacancies in care. And this lot, the very first priority on this ridiculous little list is close the temporary schemes that grant eligibility for worker visas to care workers and senior care workers. So they've sat around a table, this lot. Miriam Cates, Lee Anderson, John Hayes, Brendan Clark-Smith. They've sat around a table and said, where should we go in first? We're going to try and throw some petrol upon those embers of the immigration conversation, right? Because it is, you know, people are more worried about the cost of living. Nobody really thinks that their energy bill or their food prices are a consequence of the Polish fella living over the road anymore, in the way that they were persuaded to do similar in 2016. So we've got to get this going again, lads. They're sitting around the table, probably rubbing their thighs a bit. You know what they're like. We've got to get this going again. I hate them. Do you hate them? How much do you hate them? I really hate them. Oh, yeah, I really hate them. So who do you hate the most? Care workers. Pardon? Care workers. What? Yeah, I really hate the care. No, we're supposed to talk about feckless work-shy layabouts who come over here and claim benefits and send it all home at the same time. No. Care workers, they're the ones I really hate. Care, you know them, them in the homes, looking after the poorly and the sick and the people with dementia. Loads of them are foreign. I hate them, I do. I hate them. That's what's happened at this meeting. No one out of these 25 has sat around that table and gone, whoa. Look, I hate foreigners as much as the next man, but we've got to portray them as feckless work-shy layabouts. We can't go after the care workers. Can we, lads? And all 25 of them have gone along with it. Yeah, let's go now. Right, point 1. Close the temporary schemes that grant eligibility for worker visas to care workers and senior care workers. And that's incredible. Imagine if Farage's Nazi poster had people wearing the uniforms of care homes on it and said breaking point. I think that might even be worse, what this lot have announced. Close the... Oh, bloody care workers. I hates them, I do. I hates them. And these are the people that talk about others being out of touch. It's quite incredible, isn't it? Isn't it? It must be. Go on, give me a ring and tell me why you like it. 0345 6060 973. You're not going to do that. I appreciate. It's probably best for both of us. How about this? All right. I'm talking to you now. And I'm going to sound facetious, but I promise you I'm not being. You're not a racist, right? But you did think that we needed to take back control of our borders. And possibly you still do think that you were right to do what you did in 2016 in the hope of taking back control of our borders. But is this what you meant? Go after the care workers? Make it harder for spouses to be together? Cap the number of refugees? Even if Vladimir Putin invades 5 more countries, we will put an upper limit on how many people we're going to take from them? Is this what you meant? Is it? Reserve university study visas for the brightest international students. Good God. Jonathan Gullis proposing a scheme that recognises high intelligence. You couldn't make it up, but they did. So who... All right, maybe you're not going to tell me that you like it, so we'll have to do it this way round. Who is this going to appeal to? Do you know anyone in your life that this is going to appeal to? So you'll be in the pub tonight. You all right, John? All right, Keith. Seen this new scheme, have you? Oh, I loves it, I do. I hates those care workers, I do. I don't know why I'm doing it in a weird sort of cider drinking accent. You could be in the golf club tonight. Nigel? Derek? Seen this new scheme from Anderson and Clark Smith and the other fella? Yep. What do you think of it? Marvellous. Far too many foreigners in our care homes. I was visiting my wife only this morning after she'd been taken to the toilet by a charming little Bangladeshi. And she came back and I said, there are too many little Bangladeshis in this place, aren't there, darling? And do you know what she said to me? She said, yes, there jolly well are. Oh, hang on, I need to go again. Would you mind telling off? Who sits in their home or their pub or their golf club? Who sits there? God, too many of them. In the care homes. And that Niemöller poem gets overused and misused. You know, first they came for them. And I didn't do anything because I wasn't one of them. And then when they came for me, there was nobody left. But first they came for the benefits claimants, right? Largely non-existent constituent. No, they're not non-existent. I know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows one. All right, but largely non-existent cohort of people. Then you had the sort of Schrodinger's immigrant who comes over here to steal our jobs and claim our benefits and send them back home. Then you had the people who wouldn't integrate. And then they did integrate by getting jobs, and then you got cross with them for having jobs. So, I mean, it's like this ever-decreasing circle of bigotry and bile, ending now with the targeting of care home workers. Who is this designed to appeal to? 15 minutes after 11. And more stories, of course, about what it's like when you realise or you think, or perhaps you've known all along, that people like Miriam Cates and Lee Anderson and John Hayes and Brendan Clark-Smith, they're talking about you. It's 11:15. It is 18 minutes after 11. On we go. Rachel's in Exeter. Rachel, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi.
Hello.
It's in your comments about cruelty, really, and how cruel it is that families are being kept apart because of the Tories' views on migrants at the moment.
Yes.
My brother is a British citizen living in Europe.
Right.
He's married to a European lady. They've got one child who's a European citizen from a previous relationship she had, and one child who's British and European.
Yeah. So
And
dual
they've
nationality.
Dual nationality.
Your niece or nephew is the dual nationality one.
Yes, both.
Yeah.
Well, they're both my nieces.
Of course they are.
They're both my
God,
nieces.
look at me, an
But
adopted
one
person
unfortunately
falling
can't.
into that little trap. I do apologise. Of course they're both your nieces.
No, not at all. But unfortunately, one can't apply for British citizenship. They had always said they'd love to come to the UK. We're a very close family, and they looked into that process in this last year. And there have been so many barriers and so much hatred that my sister-in-law's seen in the press that unfortunately that now won't be happening. They've had to fund a phenomenal amount of money for her to have in her bank account, which family, were fortunate enough to find. There then had to be an additional amount kept to one side in case they needed to use the NHS. She had to prove that she was able to work. She's a very successful self-employed woman. That still wasn't sufficient. There was talk.
So she'd have to. So
apart from,
what would she have to do? Bring cat? Because I'm just thinking of Amelia's story, and you're going to be a long way further down the road than they were. They're not turning up with a tent and a couple of sleeping bags and then ending up running their own business.
£60,000 in the bank account,
right?
Which she had. She had to have proof of income, which she's been earning in excess of £30,000 on her own for many, many years. My brother's got an income of over £50,000. They then had to apply for a visa, and there was talk at one point of my brother living in the UK on his own for 6 months whilst he waited for his wife and eldest daughter to be able to get their visas.
Holy moly.
So there was a 6-month window where he would have to be apart from them, which he just said that, I can't do that. The girls are 9 months old and 6 years old, so that's at any age it's traumatic, but at that age to be separated from their father for that long is horrific.
No.
And then on top of that, my sister-in-law sees British press, hears all this rhetoric, and she's just said, we're not wanted, we're jumping through all these hoops, and all I'm going to hear is foreigners not wanted. So now they're not coming, and our family's being kept apart. They are looking at moving to Ireland, and that looks as though that's going to be a far simpler process. My brother can apply for Irish nationality.
Right. So it's already really hard to come through these routes, that's why I know this wasn't your intention, but that's why they've gone for the care workers because of the special status that they have, because of the exemptions or the I forget the precise phrase, the shortage occupation list. If you're not on the shortage occupation list, it's hoop after hoop after hoop after hoop.
Yeah.
So they couldn't go after people like your sister-in-law because it's already almost impossible for her to come here with her proud history of successful work, her British husband and her 60 grand worth plus of savings. Don't want them. She's far too foreign. But we can't go. So that's why they're going for the care home workers, right?
There is no one else left to go for now. They're going for the only
to which
people
someone
they
would
can go for.
reasonably respond by saying, well, our net immigration is 606,000, but we're going to chip away at the care home workers. It's incredible.
And it's baffling and it's cruel and it's keeping people who have a real contribution to make to this country at arm's length. And it's just, it's just baffling. And
well, it's not baffling, is it? Yeah. It's just a little bit.
It's racism.
It's just really, really racist. It's more naked than almost any point that has led us to this pass. Because normally you can say it's legitimate concerns, but this is literally saying you're too foreign. Off your trot.
Yeah. And the irony is the reason that my sister-in-law was so keen to leave the country they're in at the moment is that they have been exposed to racism there because my eldest niece is of mixed heritage, and they thought that the UK would be a safe haven. They thought it would be a place where they wouldn't be as
well. It would be better.
It would
be better than
the street. But the establishment rhetoric is horrific.
Well, this is the other thing. This is the maddest thing. It's the hardest thing to pin down actually, because in I know it's it's easy to talk about when you're not on the sharp end of it, but in comparison to other countries, the race relations in France at the moment are under a really hideous microscope. In comparison to other European countries, this is not a bad place when it comes to prejudice and racism. But our newspapers and our politicians, good God, they never stop. It's most people are. This is why I try to encourage earlier callers not to let these characters corrupt their view of the country where they are welcome, where they are home, where they live. But the newspapers and the Tory party turn it into this furnace that it doesn't need to be, and which is why I'm asking the question this hour, in addition to the ones we've been asking all along, is who does it actually appeal to? Who is going to wake up this morning and go, yes, finally someone's coming for the care home workers? 0345 6060 973. Maybe it's your mum, not you, Rachel. Just, maybe it's your mum or yours. Who is it? I just can't quite. I can see why the Nazi posters work. I can see why the faceless hordes rhetoric work. I can see why the coming over here, nicking your jobs works. I can see even why there's lots of London boroughs now where but white people aren't in the majority anymore. That means London is a foreign country. I can see how that sort of racism works. But I just can't see how this works. And the point is, I don't want to get optimistic. I don't want to start thinking, they've gone too far this time, because all the other stuff worked. Who woke up this morning and thought, yes, finally, all those foreigners in the care homes are going to be sent packing? 0345 6060 973. Rachel, take care. You'll enjoy visiting them in Ireland. I appreciate that's a pretty scant silver lining. Naz is in Enfield. Naz, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that I've been in Enfield all my life, in Barnes Green, actually.
Oh, I'm glad we cleared that up.
I was on the bus some time ago, and I was taking the bus back to Barnes Green,
yes.
And there was an elderly gentleman sitting behind me, and so a black lady got on the bus, and she sort of indicated she'd like him to move up so she could sit next to him.
Yes.
He said, I'm all right with you, love. I just don't like these people. You see, I'm wearing a scarf. I'm originally from Mauritius, but right. I was born here. And my parents came in 1959.
Like
and he said, I don't
Suella
like
Braverman's mum, I think, is from Mauritius as well. But you're wearing
don't remind me about that, James, because I'm ashamed of that.
Fair
actually.
enough.
Yeah, and so he said, I just don't like these people, and she was very embarrassed and started speaking to me.
Yes.
And when she started speaking to me, he said, if you like her so much, why don't you go and sit next to her?
He wasn't eating cat food, was he, this bloke?
Pardon?
He wasn't eating cat food, was he, this bloke, at the time?
No.
Okay, carry on.
I hate to say that I think he had a slight foreign accent as well.
Yeah.
And she carried on, and when he got up, he punched me in the back.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Oh, Naz, I wouldn't have tried to make silly jokes if I'd known that's where the story was going. I do apologise. I'm so sorry.
But he punched me in the back, and my friends and my family told me, we'll tell the police.
Yeah.
So I went on the Tell Mama line, and and the police phoned me, and they said, we know who it is. We've seen it on the bus, and,
Yeah.
And they said, would I like to press charges? And I said, no, but please tell him not to judge people, not to hurt people. He didn't know me. No. I've been in teaching. I'm now doing something for the NHS. Working, and they just judge you just because you've got a piece of scarf, a bit of a scarf on your head, and a piece of cloth. I mean, lots of times I've heard, in London. That's what I'm telling you. In London, you hear, that we're taking benefits, we're doing this, and all my children work professionally, and my husband's white, actually, English Muslim, and. We're very sort of like, I'm part of Bounds Green, I know everybody, and to be judged like that and hurt, how can a man hurt a woman? Just sitting on a bus. All I was doing was sitting on a bus. And it's not the only thing. I've been standing with my husband in the road to cross the road. He's white, as I told you, and a lorry driver poured a whole bottle of water over my head. And this is London.
Oh, dear.
It makes me really frightened now because this is London. This is where I'm born. I was born and where I've grown up. So I think that we do feel it. We do feel unwelcome, which is really sad.
It's beyond sad. It's enraging for me to hear you tell these stories now, as it really is, and to see these so-called new conservatives groups stoking up precisely the sort of feelings that you've been on the receiving end of is, frankly, a national disgrace. And that's the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party as well, not some fringe backbencher.
This really upsets me because,
I'm sure it does.
We're doing the right thing. Why should we be judged because we've got a little bit of colour? I've got a little bit of colour on my face, or I'm wearing a scarf. I've always held up the law. I've always brought up my children to, respect the law, respect elders, respect people. Why should, and it really hurts, my back hurt for a few days, and I thought, why? What pleasure did he get out of that? I can't understand because, especially he was elderly.
Yeah.
Why would I be treated like that?
Because he's a racist bigot. Because he's a racist bigot. I'm afraid that's all I've got. I've got nothing else. And I mean, if you were feeling sympathetic, and you're clearly a generous person, but if you were feeling sympathetic, you could talk about the people who've put enormous effort and energy into persuading him that you are someone who deserves to be hated or who deserves that sort of treatment, whether it's because of your ethnicity or your headscarf, your religion or your family history. I don't know, but an awful lot of people have put an awful lot of effort into turning him into that. I don't believe you're born like that. I sense you probably don't believe anyone's actually born like that. But it wasn't me that got punched in the back.
Yeah, and I love listening to your program because you make me feel that there are people that care.
Well, there are.
But they're more. But it is hard, I find it hard because it impacted on my mental health. This sort of behaviour.
Of course it did. Why didn't you press charges? Just out of Naz. Just out of interest, why didn't you press charges?
I just thought he's an elderly man. Do I really want to drag him and press charges? I just.
Okay, it's your prerogative.
I just thought, he's an old man. Really,
you showed him more compassion than he has probably showed anybody in a very, very long time. Which you have to hope somewhere inside his addled conscience that would have registered or resonated. Now, take care. I'm so sorry for what you went through, and I would once have tried to sort of jolly you along or try and pour oil upon the waters of your upset, but I don't do that anymore. I just honour your pain, and I say that's not fair. That should not have happened to you. That is wrong. That is wrong. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:34 is the time. I can only find 10 points from the 12-point plan. It could be that I'm looking in the wrong places, but the 10 are grim enough, and that's why we'll continue this conversation. Because, listen, I know I bore you rigid sometimes with my own little internal conversations. Do you give oxygen to these racists, or do you push back against? Do you see what I mean? You've got, and I use that word, I think. Here, you're going after care workers. You're trying to make it harder for families to be together because they're foreign. You've got a problem, and it begins with R, ends in ism, and has got ace in the middle. That's my problem, frankly, isn't it? Should we ignore it, or should we talk about it? Because if you talk about it, you're giving them oxygen. You just make sure you talk about it in a way that ensures, if you are giving them any oxygen, it's barely breathable. 25 to 12 is the point. Now, speaking of barely breathable, have we got any production yet for what? It's been running now for the best part of 2 weeks, as Dory's Watch. And she said last week that she would... I haven't checked yet whether she's resigned or not. I automatically, when you hear the very professional and sophisticated sting that has been carefully confected to mark our daily check on whether or not Nadine Dorries has actually resigned yet. She gave an interview last week where she said she will definitely resign before the general election. And what? I can't do this every day with this. Until then, I thought she'd be gone within a few weeks of us starting Dory's Watch. But anyway, what is if June the 9th to July the 3rd? Is it the 3rd today? Wait there a second. I know what you're thinking. Why doesn't he do all this off-air theatre? July the 3rd. So June the 9th, 30 days after September, April, June and November. That's 21 days plus 3. That's 24 days, is it? June the 9th to July the 3rd? Is it? Thank you. Apparently so. Anyway, time for this. Dory's Watch. It is now 24 days since Nadine Dorries vowed to resign as an MP with immediate effect. Nadine Dorries is still an MP. Dory's Watch. Yeah, I think I think we're getting away with that, Keith. Do you think we're getting away with that? Are you going to do any production? Are we going to have any production for? What is it? Are we a bit skinned? Have we run out of budget? Is it the end of the financial year or something like that? If this was another show on LBC, if this was the flipping newsagents podcast, they'd have production coming out their ears at the minute. They'd probably go to America to record it or something like that. I'm sat here doing it, flipping myself like I'm building something out of lolly sticks. Honestly. On we go. 37 minutes after 11 is the time. Sally is in Goff's Oak to steer us back to this question. This sad day, actually. I would go that far. Care workers. Who are you going to go after today, lads? Care home workers. What made you pick up the phone, Sally?
Well, I've been listening for 35 minutes, which is brilliant because I normally listen to you anyway.
Good.
And I've gone through the whole spectrum of an immigrant's daughter, first generation, married to a Turkish national for 37 years who was deported. Parents came over from Cyprus on British passports because they were part of the empire.
Yes.
My parents both developed Alzheimer's, dementia, one particular version or another. We had them live in their home in Haringey, so I'm a London girl, even though I just live outside London.
Yeah.
We had a Turkish-speaking carer look after them for 12 hours a day, and my sisters and I did the night duty. I could not do what a carer can do. Born in this country, educated, has a university degree, love my parents to bits, but I couldn't do what they were doing. And 30p Lee and his little cohort of, and I will say it, racist MPs are playing the racist card by targeting carers and their migrant visas because they've got no one else to go after. Everybody else is able to defend themselves. While we were standing outside our front doors, clapping for the NHS, clapping for our care workers, we were very happy to big them up, but now they want a better pay. Now they want better working conditions.
I don't even know that. I mean, the NHS is going on strike. I don't think care workers have got much recourse in those sort of areas. Do you think that do you think people like this, when they were clapping on their doorsteps, do you think under their breath they were going like this? They were going, not the foreign ones. Not the foreign ones, though. Not the foreign ones. Not the foreign ones. Not the one. No, just the white.
Here's another story, James.
Go on.
We have Turkish doctors that very well qualified in Turkey that came over here before we left the EU.
Yeah.
And they were treated like nurse auxiliaries, even though they were better qualified than the doctors on duty. Right?
Yes.
The minute we left the EU, suddenly our families that went back home because they could not be belittled because they had better qualification than the doctors here. Well, they were receiving emails from the NHS saying, well, will you come back? We'll help you get into a home. We'll get you a job. We'll get you your citizenship, but come back. And now suddenly my family member is head of A&E in a London hospital.
Wow. If
you get rid of the migrant workers that you invited here years and years ago by joining the EU, or invited them via the Windrush generation, or my parents, because we were ex-colony, we were colonised once years and years ago. Why are you now wanting to other them? They have built.
Would you answer that? Yeah, I know. What's your answer to that question? Because I walk a tightrope between people who have been groomed into a position of prejudice and people who embrace it with rancid enthusiasm. You can understand why some people felt that their wages were being driven down or their their social infrastructure was being overrun. You can see how people ended up in those places. But today,
No, I get it.
But today I don't.
My husband's a contractor, and
Right.
he would rather employ someone of EU, a Bulgarian or Polish or whatever, or Lithuanian or Ukraine,
Yes.
because they were cheaper
Yes.
than our English-Irish builders.
And that you can see why that would wind up the English-Irish builder. So
Exactly.
you can sometimes see the way into
I can
these.
see both sides.
But I
can
can't see
both
it with the
sides.
care workers. Can you see it with the care workers?
No, because the indigenous population
Ugh, hate that word.
won't do. I hate that word as well.
Yeah.
But it's the only way that I can differentiate
No,
between
of course. People who were
someone
born
like
here.
me.
It's not even people who were born here, because Naz has
Exactly.
just reminded us she's still getting clattered on a bus, isn't she, despite the fact that she
Yeah,
was
but
born here.
I'm also an ex-Bound Screen resident, so
Oh,
I
there
know
you
what
go.
she's going through. So what I'm saying is this. People born and brought up in this country, right, are quite, for me in particular, I'm quite happy to look after my mum.
course.
I love looking after my mum because she brought me. I am who I am because of my parents. But I could not do what a carer would do. Wipe my mum when she. I mean, I did if I had to. Again, if I had to, a carer would do everything that we as children of these elderly would not do. Wipe up their sick, feed them by their hands, because we don't have the patience. We weren't brought up with the. I certainly didn't, and I'm talking for myself. My sisters could, I couldn't.
And that's the point,
People
isn't
in
it?
this country will not look after their parents because they believe that when they grow up and they've moved out of their house, the responsibility for looking after their parents is no longer
It's a
there.
different, well, and that is a cultural development for good or for ill that I don't think anybody can argue with. But they're going to have to, under these plans, under Miriam Cates' glorious rule, they're going to be forced to go and look after other people's parents. It's quite an incredible point that Sally makes at the end there about that it is not part really of British. I don't know, indigenous. What word could you use? Because there's plenty of British Asian people who look after their parents, British Turkish people who look after their parents. The British people tend not to do that. We tend to use care homes, which means that under this plan that you'll have British people being rounded up and forced to go to work in care homes where they'll look after somebody else's parents, even though they wouldn't want to look after their. I just don't get it. I don't get it. Not the care home bit. The rest of it, I could probably unpick in a vaguely charitable way, but not this. To go in first, who should we go after first? The care home workers. Down with them. Unbelievable. Some very funny breaking news for you with regards to Sue Gray. There was an independent inquiry undertaken into Keir Starmer's appointment of Sue Gray as his Chief of Staff, which found that there hadn't been any particular breaking of rules, and she's free to take up her role in October. But the Cabinet Office, run by Simon Case, who I'm told is the reason why Sue Gray wanted to leave the civil service, the Cabinet Office decided to run their own inquiry, which she refused to cooperate with. And they have found that she did break the rules. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it if you follow such matters closely. She didn't cooperate with it at all on the, I think, fairly reasonable grounds that she didn't trust them to run a bath. But they have found her to be in breach of the rules. Although any conversations between her and Keir Starmer that they allude to or believe occurred didn't happen until 6 months after she'd completed her what's in my chops into the what is it? I don't even. How do you explain the Sue Gray story to someone from outside of town? Just say, well, they broke loads and loads of rules. She did an inquiry into it, which was pretty soft, and then she went to work for the bloke who didn't break any rules, and they're all furious. Sometimes I think they don't even know why they're furious, do they? What are you furious about? Well, she did a thing, and what? Rah! But what do you think she did wrong? Well, she was talking to the, But she's allowed to go and work for them after a 6 months. Yeah, but so you're just cross again that you put all your eggs in Boris Johnson's basket and he threw it down the toilet, aren't you? That's what you're really cross about. That's not her fault. I thought her report was pretty shoddy, to be honest with you. It seemed to me that there were an awful lot of rocks she hadn't looked under, as has subsequently emerged. The Chequers stuff, it's much like she didn't go head around that. She took the parameters of her inquiry and tightened it and tightened it and tightened it. But as Julie points out, Simon Case has got the headlines he wanted today. Just the sort of creation of some miasma of wrongdoing or suspicion around Sue Gray, despite the fact that the the viable inquiry, the valid inquiry, if you like, the official inquiry, had found that she had done absolutely nothing wrong. The argument that it undermined the impartiality of her inquiry into lockdown breaking parties is one of my favourite arguments of the last year, because the Daily Mail described it as a great big pile of nothing burger. They may not have used those exact words. Boris Johnson did a little tour of, wherever he does his tours, Boris Johnson did a little lap around the track, claiming that he'd been completely exonerated. But now the woman that wrote it is going to work for the Labour Party. They're claiming that the report was very biased and unfair. So look, either it was a damp squib and a nothing burger that completely exonerated Boris Johnson, or the woman that wrote it was biased and the report was unfair. It's kind of hard to have both, but it won't stop the Daily Mail from trying. It's 10 to 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I can't find anyone. I mean, there was an interesting thing last week. I don't know if you saw it on Question Time, when Fiona Bruce asked the audience whether or not they liked the idea of deporting people to Rwanda. And nobody put their hands up, which is odd, given that the audience in Question Time is skewed according to the results of the last general election, which means that there's not disproportionate, but there's a majority of Conservative voters in the audience. You'd presume they're the people for whom this policy is designed. And not a single person put their hands up. I mean, don't read too much into that, because you'd wait, wouldn't you? You wouldn't want to be first. So there'd be quite a lot of people sitting there. And she might as well have said, put your hands up if you're a massive bigot. And you're going to think, well, I mean, I used to. We were all right. We used to have a great time in the old Question Time audience. There was me and Derek and Roger and Big Nige. We used to be people just waving, I'm a massive bigot, and you could speak every week, and then you'd get some lefties on Twitter calling you gammon and putting together lots of pictures of it. It was great. It was like being famous. So you never used to have any problem admitting you were a massive bigot while sitting in the Question Time audience. But times have changed, pendulums swing, time passes. So then Fiona Bruce said, anyone here like the Rwanda policy? And you're like this, aren't you? You're like, I'm not putting my hand up first. And then no one puts that. But I bet there were some people there who would have done if someone else had gone first. Someone needed to break the seal, right? That's what they needed to do. So I wouldn't read too much into it. But I genuinely can't quite imagine somebody today going, yes, the care home workers, the foreign-born care home workers, finally a clampdown. I just can't see it. Also, I think that my suggestion Lee Anderson had dropped yet another boo-boo by sticking his name on this stuff while still being Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. I think that's come home to roost already as well, because I'm told he won't be at the launch shortly of this rancid list. Apparently he's a bit poorly. It's probably all the cat food he eats, isn't it? Although I believe that cat food is fit for human consumption. Apparently they're serving it in some schools now because so many children are... That's a joke. It's a joke. This is not a radio programme that falls for nonsense like that. There are plenty that do, I'm told. But the idea that children are identifying as cats in British schools. Funny how all the people who told you it was true have gone very quiet about that, isn't it? And funny how all the people who... Well, hang on, let's have a look in Idiot's Corner. Here we go. Steve in Guildford. Again, your rhetoric. There's an H. There's an H in rhetoric, Steve. Has had its trousers down. How do you feel backpedaling? And again, that's peddling. Anyway, I presume you're referring to the Sue Gray story, which, once again, the official independent inquiry completely exonerated her. But Simon Case, in the Cabinet Office, has conducted his own inquiry and found that she was very naughty. Simon Case remains the reason why Sue Gray wanted to leave the civil service. So, yeah, I mean, by all means, Steve, you stick your colours to that particular mast, but it ain't rhetoric, mate. It's facts. We talk about the official independent inquiry versus Boris Johnson's mate Simon Case's inquiry. You pick your horse and you place your bets. 11:54. Paul's in Newcastle. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Paul.
I feel management by Lee Anderson and this group is putting a target on care workers' back. You make the locals feel like maybe
I'm going to try and improve the phone line there, Paul, if I can. I don't know, probably because I banged on for so long while you were on hold. I didn't quite get to you quick enough. So with no further ado, while we try and improve that, I'll go to Beatrice, who's in Mitcham. Beatrice, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Firstly, I wanted to say thank you for having me on. I listen to your program a lot and I've read your book. I'm really grateful that you are making space for people affected by this and just in general about affected by the government's anti-immigration rhetoric to speak.
It's not, to be fair, I mean, there's plenty of anti-immigration rhetoric in the government, but this is people who don't think it's anti-immigration enough. These are not, well, I suppose 30p Lee's going to have some questions to answer, but the other 24 are backbenchers or sidecars. They're not motorbikes. So it's not, you can't pin this particular charge sheet on the government, but on we go.
Yes, that's true. But it's nice to have a space really to be heard and to tell our stories. So I'm originally from Romania. I moved to London nearly 10 years ago now to study as an actor, which is not, a needed. There are so many of us anyway, so it's not like I'm needed in that sense. But sure. I think that's maybe one of the things that has given me a different perspective on things as well. And there were kind of 2 points that I wanted to make, which one of them is I came from Romania at the age of 18, studying to be an actor. My accent clearly changed. And
I'm glad I didn't ask. I nearly asked quite early on in this conversation, but I didn't. I try to interrupt a bit less these days, and then you revealed why your accent is so. Well, I can't detect any Romanian there at all. Maybe someone else could, but I can't.
So I think I've kind of been in a position where I've witnessed conversations and been in rooms where people didn't know where I was from.
Of course. Yes.
And a lot of things were said in ways that were very ignorant and upsetting. But I think that's not, I mean, I could talk about this until the cows come home, but I think the point I was trying to make is that I moved here with my mum. Now, my mum was in her 40s. Her accent didn't really change. Her English wasn't as good as mine. What I noticed a lot is the difference the difference between how we were treated,
yes,
and how as a student it was slightly different. But her trying to look for work and find work, and it was very hard for her, and she was paid less than other people, and she got less interviews than other people. And when she took her nationality off her CV, things changed. And that's really that was kind of a big wake up call for us, because we weren't prepared for this kind of attitude. We came with big dreams and we thought, if we're hardworking, we're going to prove ourselves that we're good at what we do and we're going to be treated fairly. But that wasn't really the case. And that brings me kind of to my second point, which is I understand that it is important to contribute, of course, and to be a part of society and to pay your dues and everything. But I just think that there's a lot of the conversation feels like a lot of the time it's about proving yourself and proving your worth. And it almost feels like your dignity is connected to that. You're not allowed your human dignity unless you can economically prove your worth.
That's not confined to the immigration conversation, actually. I often have people telling me that they've never claimed any benefits in their life. And that's an ecosystem created by rancid right-wing media, because, there's nothing wrong if you've had a bit of bad luck or if you're on your uppers. There's nothing wrong in using the safety net of the welfare state. But you're right, because everyone operates on the presumption of being judged, don't they? Everyone operates on the presumption of being judged and found guilty of, and insert whatever prejudice you want here, being a scrounger, being lazy, being a foreigner, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter, does it? A day like today, you're a care worker, you're a care home worker, which, without wanting to offend you, Beatrice, is an easier sector of society for me to muster up my listeners' sympathy for than the thespian sector of society, but only, I mean, because it's so emotive. So a care home worker today being told, thanks anyway, but we don't really want your sort in this country. That's incredible. That's incredible. You can't justify it, because what else do I have to do? I'm looking after people no one else will look after. I'm looking after your parents. I'm looking after your grandparents. I'm helping them use the lavatory. I'm cleaning them. I'm washing them in their beds. Sorry, no, not enough. Not enough. Off you go. We'll find someone else. Thanks. It's mad. It's a really bad day. A really bad day.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think on that point, one other thing that I wanted to say was my experience, Brexit happened just after I arrived. So I arrived in 2013, not too many years later. The whole Leave campaign was happening, and it was really, really hard for someone who was young and just kind of adapting to a new country for all of that to be in the press. And like most people said, most people that I was in contact with were lovely people, were very nice. What I saw in the newspapers wasn't what I was living every day. That's the thing.
It's an important thing to pin down, isn't it? And I won't bore you anymore with my own wrestling with the question of where that line lies between giving these monsters oxygen, giving them attention, and properly reflecting what the country is really like. Thank you, Beatrice. It's coming up to 12 o'clock. The Secretary of State, Shadow Secretary of State for Education, Bridget Phillipson, with me at past. If you've got any questions you would like to put to her, then do get in touch using the usual number. I'll give you a quick heads up when it's time to start doing that. Ben Kenti's got an interesting little tale for us shortly, and I am also keen to pin down a little bit of the detail on what the heck has happened to Twitter. But historically, despite me loving it and spending far too much time on there, it doesn't generally work on the radio. That 4 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm getting some very sad messages in, some very poignant text and stories, and issues that are not receiving coverage because, well, you can probably work out why, but the difficulty of looking after family if you've got roots in two countries, including the United Kingdom, the way it's got worse. Here's a good one from Dave. My French partner's mother is now 80 years old. She's on her own in Marseille. Before Brexit, we'd have moved there to take care of her, but that's now extremely difficult, so we thought she'd be better off coming here. No chance. Now we have to prove that she's totally unable to care for herself. These racist Tory MPs now want to make things even harder. There are few people that I have disliked as much as this lot, but I do hate them with a vengeance. 5 minutes after 12 is it feels like a new low to me. Of course, we may have misunderstood the detail. Actually, I don't know why I need to say that on this. I haven't misunderstood anything. It is a new low. Slight change of pace now. Ben Kentish, LBC's Westminster editor, is in the studio, and you have been beavering away, Ben.
James, indeed, and I can tell you this morning or this afternoon that the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, is today accused of misleading Parliament over a claim that he made covering for his boss Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's Questions last month that seems, from all our investigations, to be pretty much baseless. Here's what he said.
What do we have from the party opposite? Plans for an unfunded £28 billion spending spree. And what would that do? Drive up borrowing, push up interest rates, adding £1,000 to everyone's mortgage. Mr. Speaker, I know they're out of touch, but even she must realise that Britain cannot afford Labour.
What you heard there, James, Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden claiming that Labour's plans to invest £28 billion a year in green energy would add £1,000 a year to everyone's mortgages. Now, that's a big claim. It's very difficult to work out how any policy will have an impact on interest rates because, of course, interest rates are set independently of government. And it's even more difficult. In fact, it's virtually impossible to put a specific figure on it. And yet, as you just heard, that's exactly what Oliver Dowden did. So where does that figure, where does that claim come from? Well, the day before that session of PMQs at the start of June, the Daily Mail ran a story on that very figure, stating that it had been the conclusion of what they called Treasury analysis.
Oh, Treasury analysis.
Treasury analysis.
That's
you
okay,
might think that sounds very credible, James. You think it sounds very official, and indeed it does. And it's not unusual for Treasury civil servants to analyse the impact of opposition policies in that way. It wouldn't be surprising if they had. The problem here is they didn't.
Pardon?
They hadn't. The Treasury admitted to me that it made no such official analysis of that Labour policy. And it's not just us that's been asking questions. The UK statistics watchdog has also been demanding answers after becoming concerned about that figure and where it came from. And in response to them too, the Treasury admitted, and I quote directly, that the figure quoted is not based on any analysis produced by Treasury officials. In fact, despite investigating this, the UK Statistics Authority told me they'd been unable to establish any official source for it at all. So the Treasury analysis quoted by Oliver Dowden as fact in the House of Commons wasn't actually produced by Treasury officials, James. Where did it come from? You might
wonder. Who gave it to the Daily Mail?
Or who gave it to the Daily Mail? Let's get into that. It seems that rather than being any sort of official analysis at all, despite being reported as such, the figure was actually produced by Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor's political advisors. One source telling me the SPAD, special advisors, got their heads together and briefed it out. So an apparently pretty much baseless statistic has been seemingly pulled from the air by Conservative Party advisors, passed off as some sort of independent and official Treasury research when it's nothing of the sort, and then repeated by the Deputy Prime Minister at Prime Minister's questions. That's a pretty serious matter. The Ministerial Code, James, is very clear in saying it is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity. And that is exactly what Labour is now demanding that Oliver Dowden do. Angela Rayner, the party's deputy leader, of course, telling me that Oliver Dowden, she says, has been caught out misleading Parliament, trying to pass off baseless claims and desperate scaremongering as official Treasury analysis. She says he must now urgently correct the record in line with his obligations under the Ministerial Code, and says the Tories should have realised by now that misleading Parliament is a serious matter, but it appears, she claims, that they'll never apologise, never learn and never change. And my understanding from talking to his team, James, is that Oliver Dowden, for now at least, seems unlikely to be apologising. A source close to him telling me that borrowing on that scale would mean interest rates rise further and stay higher for longer, and that any mortgage calculator would show what that would mean for the average mortgage. But the Treasury has effectively rejected the figure. The UK Statistics Authority, James, says there's no source for the figure. I strongly suspect that we won't be hearing that claim ever again.
Fake news. Couldn't possibly comment.
Well, it's certainly baseless.
I mean, if you were Oliver Dowden, how much of this could you lay at the feet of the Daily Mail? Not that a politically ambitious Conservative politician is ever really going to finger the Daily Mail for anything, but could he say, I'm sorry, I read it in the Daily Mail.
If you're the Deputy Prime Minister and you choose to quote a figure as fact in the House of Commons as a Treasury analysis...
Did he use the phrase Treasury analysis?
He didn't use the phrase Treasury analysis.
But he got it from the previous day's
Daily Mail. Then it is ultimately... It's on ministers to make sure that the information that they provide to Parliament is accurate. No suggestion, of course, that Oliver Dowden knew it wasn't, or that he lied or anything like that.
He could have checked.
Intentional.
He could have made a phone call, couldn't he? He said, hey, I've got this stuff from the Daily Mail. Can I speak to the people who did the Treasury analysis, please, before I do PMQs this afternoon? And they'd have gone, well, that's a bit awkward, Ollie.
The Ministerial Code is very clear that it is the obligation of ministers to make sure that everything they say is factually correct. And if it's not, as it seems in this case it wasn't, then their duty is to correct the record as soon as possible.
I'm told that since you started talking, Simon Case at the Cabinet Office has conducted an inquiry that has completely exonerated Oliver Dowden. Just in the last 43 seconds. So, it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? You've got the official statistics watchdog and the facts on the one hand, as the independent inquiry into Sue Gray also had, and then you've got Simon Case's cabinet comedy on the other, coming up with completely different conclusions. Ben Kentish, many thanks indeed. 11 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to catch up with that little... I think we smelt a rat quite early on this New Conservatives. We'll do that shortly, but first a couple more calls. Back to this. I can't believe I'm saying these words, even after all the years we've spent together, all the stories that we've discussed together, and all the scandals, but both borderline and enormous, that we have examined together. I can't quite believe I'm about to say to you, let's return now to the targeting of care home workers by racist politicians. Jessica's in Queen's Park. Jessica, what would you like to say?
First is a big sigh. Because,
I like it. I could hear it from here.
Honestly, my grandmother is 98 years young.
Gosh.
And she used to work in the health service, actually.
Okay.
She even worked in the care home as a nurse.
Gosh.
I looked after her as much as I could and cared for her at home, especially during lockdown. So that's when she was diagnosed, by the way, was because her life was taken away from her. And so she developed dementia, and it gradually got worse. So I looked after her at home, and we had care workers coming to the home, and they were amazing. I couldn't have managed without them. Until such time as last year, when it became too much for me, especially with going back to work, the world opening up again. I couldn't be there as much as I wanted to. and so relied very much on a care home. And so she went into a care home last year. In the entire time that I've had care workers coming to the house and me going to the care home, I go regularly to the care home, there is not one British-born person that I've ever encountered not coming to the home and not looking after her in the care home, not the nurses and not the care workers, no one.
And no, I think this is the point at which Jonathan Gullis goes, exactly. That's the problem.
No one is stopping British people. No one's stopping anyone from working in care homes.
No one stops your nan.
Right? My nan worked in a care home, right? So no one's stopping anyone working to the care home. But the sheer number that we need in care homes, because someone said the indigenous population is ageing. It's the fastest growing group is the over 65s. And it feels like, from what I'm understanding, that things like dementia is increasing.
Yeah,
so,
of course. Well, I mean, no, the life expectancy, as you mentioned, is getting longer, and the longer you live, the higher the likelihood of developing a condition that would see you end up in a care home. And I think our birth rate could be higher as well. We've got some, there's room for improvement there as well. Factor in the 165,000 vacancies in the adult care sector, up 52%, our favourite percentage, up 52% from the year before. And even if you were the biggest racist in the world, this policy is stupid.
But it doesn't make any sense.
No.
I literally sat and listened to you this morning. I listen to you most mornings, and
Pardon?
most mornings I
don't. What do you mean most?
Most mornings.
What do you mean most mornings?
Because you're not on every morning.
Oh yeah,
you're
right.
not on at the
weekends. Okay, there's a podcast. Carry on.
Okay, so I normally listen,
Yeah.
and pretty much every caller calls up and they say what I'm going to say, or you say what I would say. So I don't call. I just listen. But this morning, for my grandmother, I had to call because she looked after so well every single one of those care workers. Treat her with kindness, with consideration, mindful of her self-respect and her dignity, and to have those people have a question mark over them when they already do so much, when they see, the most horrible conditions that some people are in because of their health condition, to then say, it's all right, we've got it from here, we're gonna have, indigenous British people do it, but they're not doing it.
No, and who are they? I mean, where are they?
And the difference is, what I'm seeing is this weird way of policy making where they just announce things.
Well, this is again.
This
isn't the government. This is a kind of weird fringe group. No, it's not this time. It's a weird fringe group of sort of Gullis and Miriam Cates and Brendan Clark Smith. I've been saying 30p Lee all morning, but the more I think about it, the more I wonder how the hell the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party could have put his name to this. It just, even by his standards of not really understanding anything, this seems like potentially a new low. I'm told we may have some developments on that front shortly. But even if you were a student of racist rhetoric, Jessica, you would not sell this because at some point, very early in the conversation, someone turns around and says, well, hang on, who's going to look after my gran? To which they respond by saying that local hoodlums hanging around outside the chip shop, we will force them to go to work it falls apart at the very first glance.
But can I tell you why?
Please.
I think that he put his name to it? Because the Conservative Party, the last, how many governments have there been?
406.
Right. The most recent ones, say in the last 3 years, have really made the environment very comfortable to say things like that. They've said so much, whether it's, from Suella Braverman to Priti Patel, the kind of rhetoric that's been coming out over the past couple of years just meant that this shouldn't even be a surprise to people. I just hope that people, even the really racist, xenophobic ones, really think, actually, I've been gone down a rabbit hole with this lot, and this is not going to get me what I want, which is my family looked after, our hospitals running efficiently, our services running efficiently. This is not going to get us there, because the difference with agricultural workers not being able to come from the European Union and having some rotten strawberries and some limp lettuces to deal with. You're dealing with people and lives and the dignity of people and just how our country functions. People aren't fruit. there's no one to pick them up if we stop these people from coming in and doing the work that no one here actually wants to do. And that is why we have immigration more often than not, is that people come here doing the work that British people don't do. And there are huge numbers of vacancies, and they go abroad, they bring people in, they recruit them in to do the jobs.
And then the spotlight perhaps will now move to the economically inactive, but this is not the traditional unemployed. This is a different cohort of people. Unemployment is actually very low at the moment. Low unemployment, high vacancies, and then people who are not working for a variety of reasons, including health, and very obvious possibility that they simply don't need to, so they've decided not to. Quite how you're going to corral them into jobs which are in the categories that you've discussed is anybody's guess. But thankfully we have the galaxy brains of Jonathan Gullis, Brendan Clark-Smith, and possibly 30p Lee Anderson tackling this hefty intellectual challenge as we speak. Or do we? 21 minutes after 12 is the time. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson with us shortly, so do get your questions. Should we do that now? Should we clear the board and start getting questions ready now? I don't know that I'm going to have time to talk to anybody else before. But anyway, keep a couple on there just in case, and then clear the rest, and then get your questions in for the Shadow Education Secretary. Education, of course, was a large part of the platform upon which the last Labour government was built, and it's Bridget's brief this time round, potentially, reshuffles notwithstanding. So anything that you'd like to know about what they've got planned. Private education, of course, being subject to VAT, being one of the policies that we know about. I think there's been a row back on free school dinners for everybody, free school meals for all children, but we shall find out. And of course, teachers, recruitment and retention being huge problems, even as schools fall apart about their ears, according to some of the reports this week. So there's plenty to get your teeth into. If you would like to book your place on my switchboard, the number you need remains 03456060973. I have another correspondent. It's almost like a proper grown-up radio show, this. I wave goodbye to LBC's Westminster editor Ben Kentish with one little scoopette, and in saunters LBC's political correspondent Henry Riley with another one. I could get used to this, Henry. Spoiled I am.
James, good afternoon. Here to talk to you about the new... Yes, cheers, thank you. Following on. Right, the New Conservatives, of course, they are launching today. We've known about the group for a few months, but today we're really getting into... Yeah, they came about talking about family values a couple of months back, around the time that Danny Kruger did a speech. But today they're talking about immigration. They've got sort of the Conservatives, Rishi Sunak, the government really in their sights. They want to pile more pressure on the government to reduce net migration. Of course, it was 606,000 last year. Rather than me explaining what they do, this was Jonathan Gullis, who is one of their members.
So we're a group of 2017-2019 newly elected Conservative MPs who are wanting to make sure that we lean into what we saw as the long-term political realignment, particularly play out in the 2019 general election, where the Conservatives got a consensus of voters from across the traditional Tory shires, as they would be known, all the way through to red wall seats like my own in Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork. And ultimately with today, what we're doing is launching an exciting paper with our ideas on how we can get migration numbers back to those pre-pandemic levels.
Looking at the website for the New Conservatives, I mean, the points on immigration: close the temporary schemes that grant eligibility for worker visas to care workers and senior care workers, close the graduate route to students. It sounds a bit like you're the anti-growth coalition.
Not at all. Look, I think it's important to understand, first of all, that any policy regarding care workers would, of course, be gradual, something that we're seeing already when it comes to the Prime Minister's efforts on international students, particularly those studying their masters and doctorate.
Now, looking at their list of members, James, you've got Gareth Bacon, Brendan Clark-Smith. I won't go through the full list of 20 on their website.
No, go on.
Should I?
Yeah.
OK, you've got Laia Nietzsche, who was one of the 7 that voted against the Privileges Committee report.
She's the one that was waving it around, saying she hadn't seen any evidence that Boris Johnson had broken any rules. So she's another galaxy brain. There's
Robin Miller.
Yeah, never heard of him.
Marco Longhi.
Yep.
Andrew Luer.
Who?
Luer. Danny Kruger.
Yep.
Mark Jenkinson.
He was at the NatC conference, wasn't he, Danny Kruger?
He was at the NatCon, conference.
Yep.
Mark Jenkinson.
Oh, blimey.
Yes.
Yep. It's the Brains Trust.
Well known on Twitter. Tom Hunt, Eddie Hughes, James Grundy. There's quite a few more.
He's in the Archers.
Chris Green, Nick Fletcher, Paul Bristow, James Daly, Jack Berreton, Duncan Baker. There's quite a few.
Carry on. I want all of
you
them.
want all of them.
Yeah,
Miriam Cates.
Yeah, another Christian.
Anna Firth.
Yep.
Jonathan Gullis, who, of course, I spoke with just then. And that's it, Gareth Bacon, who I think I said as well.
That'll do, thank you.
But, of course, there's a lot of speculation as to who is in the group and who isn't. Is Lee Anderson in the group?
Well, yes, he must be.
Well, I spoke with Jonathan Gullis, and he said he was.
Oh.
Well, so look, Lee is a member of the group. He's a supporter. He's obviously voluntarily put himself forward for it, and ultimately we're delighted to have him. As you say, he is the deputy leader of the Conservative Party, but we also have many parliamentary private secretaries as well, and former ministers like Eddie Hughes, the current member of Parliament for Walsall North.
Now, I know Jonathan Gullis probably hasn't had this much airtime on the James O'Brien show before, but last clip from Jonathan Gullis, he did.
What the hell is going on?
Rather than having a go at Rishi Sunak, he insists this is a sort of attack on Keir Starmer, and he had a rather interesting analogy for me.
Right.
So Keir Starmer is continuously flip-flopping and U-turning on every single issue that's going on. In fact, B&Q run out of fences because the amount of fences he wants to sit on, in order to try and pivot away from every nonsense policy he comes up with, and then ditches as soon as he gets a bit of inspection by you in the media and by the British public.
So, hang on, he thinks that sitting on a fence involves going to B&Q, buying a fence, and then sitting on it once... and throwing it away.
Replacing it.
And replacing it with another new fence, also from B&Q. And that's why he sits on the fence so much. B&Q have run out of fences.
Because Keir Starmer's buying them all.
And he flip-flops a lot, but they're calling upon Rishi Sunak to flip-flop on his immigration policy.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I did contact B&Q, by the way, who assured me they are well stocked with fences, so there is actually not a fence shortage.
Unless you check, because if
I did.
good.
Yeah.
So we're all right on the fences front. Okay.
But yes, that's. We find out more at 1:00 when they launch it.
Okay, what a time to be alive. And I'm sorry, Lee Anderson, is he or isn't he part of this group?
He's part of the group, confirmed by Jonathan Gullis, but he is unwell, and so he won't be attending the launch today.
And is he on the website?
He's not listed on the website. Interestingly,
but then he's not in the group. He's not on the list. He's not coming in.
Well, I suspect he was in the group, but perhaps there are other names. Sir John Hayes, the former minister as well, he was referenced to be on the group, but considering he's been an MP since 1997, it didn't really fit with the new Conservatives mould.
No, just like the old Conservative. Anyway, thank you, Henry Riley. I'm going to squeeze in another guest, actually. This is Will Guy, LBC's technology correspondent. I've got a very important guest. No offence, Will. I mean, you're marginally important. You're mildly important. I've got a very important guest. Shadow cabinet level, no less, after the news. So quick as you can, what the flip is going on with Twitter?
I don't think anybody knows. That's the problem.
Oh, that was quick. That was short and sweet. Have a lovely. No, carry on.
Have a great time. Yeah, no, look, Elon Musk is running it like he's Cookie Monster at a car boot sale. I really don't think he knows what he's doing anymore. James, there was this claim at the weekend he was doing the limiting of tweets so people couldn't see tweets because he was trying to stop artificial intelligence companies stripping data and information from Twitter and using it to build their artificial intelligence algorithms. But coincidentally, at the same time, a massive $1 billion cloud services contract that Twitter had with Google ended the day before. And it would be quite unfortunate if Elon Musk's bluff was called on the long Independence Day weekend holiday in the US, wouldn't it? When all of his remaining engineers simply weren't at the company. I just think this bloke has no idea what he's doing with this thing, and I don't think he even cares anymore. It's a race to the end, I think, for Twitter now. I really do.
Good grief, I wasn't expecting you to say that, and I haven't really got time to explore further for reasons previously discussed. But I mean, what, he'll just write the money off as Twitter slowly spirals into obscurity?
Well, he's just attempting to make it really hard for anybody to use it. He's trying to encourage people to use this awful Twitter Blue service that nobody is signing up for. And he's just increasingly showing everybody that he's not a very nice person. One of the things, James, that's getting my goat at the moment, real disruptors don't need to be raging arses. They really don't. They can be better people than this. Musk is now being pursued in multiple countries simply for not contacting people who they owe money to. So Twitter owes a ton of money to property companies in 4 different countries. The company
for rent,
said in their
for office rent.
office rent.
Right.
The courts have said the company has not even given their request for payment a response. So nobody's come back and said, "Now Elon's not paying it." They've not even responded. That comes from the top. That comes from leaders in a company. He's not got any respect for anybody. He hasn't got respect for his users. He was telling us all at the weekend, go out and look outside, enjoy the outside while Twitter is
I thought
broken.
that was brilliant. That's like buying a supermarket and then encouraging everybody to stop buying food.
Yeah, it's a mess. And if you've got time, when you've got space for me on another day, I'm sure we can have a bigger talk about the demise.
I look forward to it.
That's where it's at.
Unless Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, can give me chapter and verse on what's going on at Twitter at the moment. You never know. Well, do you? LBC's technology correspondent, Will Guyatt there, and Bridget Phillipson taking your calls after the very latest headlines with Lottie Morley. 33 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, joined by the Shadow Secretary of State for Education, Bridget Phillipson. Welcome.
Hello, good to be with you.
I've been getting it in the neck all morning for mispronouncing Houghton.
But you're getting it right now.
I'm getting it right. I'm just checking.
That's correct.
So Houghton and Sunderland South is your constituency, but education is your brief. I think we might go straight to the phones. We haven't got you for long. I reserve the right to butt in at any point, Bridget, but let's see. Let's start with Sarah in High Wycombe. Sarah, what would you like to ask Bridget?
Bridget, I'd like to ask whether Labour understands just how disastrous the situation is in state education at the moment. I've been teaching 20 years and I have never known it's this bad. There are two main problems, recruitment and finances. So recruitment-wise, Buckinghamshire, where I teach, I know we've got more than 100 vacancies for September. My own little school, we had a vacant position from November. We filled it, and then 2 more people resigned. And these are people who are leaving the profession. Teaching assistants, we're paying them £10, £11 an hour. The situation is even worse. We had to promote somebody from our kitchen staff, and she left to go to a better paid job in retail. It's absolute recruitment's disastrous, but also the finances. My own daughter's school, it's one of the best grammar schools in Buckinghamshire. They haven't got a properly working boiler, and they can't afford to fix it next year either. So if Labour get in, it's going to need radical change to sort this situation out, because the Tories have left it in a state of collapse after 13 years and 10 education secretaries.
Was there, Sarah, a moment of realisation? I mean, was there a breach? Was there a moment where it felt like something had snapped? Or are we talking about a sort of exercise in boiling frogs? Has it just been an incremental... I mean, to be fair, it's a bit of an open goal for Bridget, for the first caller to come on and say, do you realise just how awful the other lot have been for the last 13 years? But we'll let her deal with that in a minute. I just wonder, from your point of view, over that 20 years, is there a milestone, or has it been a slow decline?
So I trained under the Blair government, and they actually paid us £6,000 to do our PGCE, for living expenses. So I came into education when there was money for special needs, there was money for sport, and then gradually since 2010 in austerity. And the thing is, it's not just what they've done to the profession, it's what they've done to the children as well.
Okay. Bridget Phillipson, are you prepared for the scale of the challenge, should you end up in government?
Absolutely. I mean, what Sarah has just said there is what I hear the length and breadth of the country. People who've been in education for a long time telling me they've never known it be so difficult. But I am confident that, as we did in government last time around, we can turn it around. The challenges are big, but on recruitment and retention, on the challenges that families are facing. And that is, I think, what drives some of the biggest pressures on school at the moment, whether it's young people's mental health, the fact that so many kids aren't getting a great start to the day. That's why I've set out plans around delivering breakfast clubs in all of our primary schools so that children do get the opportunity to get a really good start to the day. But the impact that has on their behaviour, on their attendance at school, the evidence is really clear about that. Education will be a really big priority for the next Labour government in a way it hasn't been for this Conservative government. We've had 5 Secretaries of State in the last year alone. It's a peripheral issue, yet we know that education is one of the single biggest ways in which we can drive opportunity and allow people, see people's lives transformed. That was very much my experience growing up. Education transformed my life, and I'm determined that if I'm fortunate enough to be Education Secretary in the next Labour government, I'll make sure that happens for every child across our country.
Where do you stand on the strikes? Because I think there's more due imminently, isn't there?
The strikes are disruptive. I don't want to see them going ahead.
No one wants to see them going ahead, but do you reckon...
They don't... They don't need to go ahead. I mean, if the Secretary of State was serious about negotiating, if she were to publish the independent peer review body, which she refuses to do, if she were to be prepared to get around the table and have a conversation with the teaching unions, I'm confident that the strike action could be averted, and it's not too late. It's due to happen later this week. But as I understand it, there's been no proper discussion with the teaching unions since April. The government have just given up. And my approach would be to seek to reset that relationship between government and the teaching profession, but also to re-establish the status of teaching as a profession. I think some of what Sarah was just saying there is that teachers don't really feel valued or appreciated for what they're doing. We saw what happened during the pandemic, how important teachers and school staff were in making sure that children were supported. We've then come out of the pandemic and the government have said to them, sorry, just get on with it. I don't think that's right.
How does it work when you're in opposition? And, you'll be hoping that you still have this brief in government. There's two reasons why you might not. Politically speaking, you might not win the general election or the leader may not keep you in the post. But how sophisticated is your to-do list as you prepare for power, potentially?
It's a very big to-do list. There is a lot that needs to be fixed.
How do you decide what to put at the top of it?
I think it's a combination of things that we could do quite quickly that would start to make a difference, and then some of that longer-term work that needs to run alongside it. I've spent quite a lot of time speaking to David Blunkett, who was in my position in the run-up to 1997 and very, very quickly made progress, hit the ground running, a really ambitious agenda for change that we saw in 97. I think we also saw the same actually where it comes to Michael Gove. I wouldn't agree with everything that he did in 2010, but they were clear about what they wanted to do. They had a plan to make it happen and they got on and did it. And that's the work that I've been doing as Shadow Education Secretary so that I can hit the ground running, start making an impact and change children's lives.
Sarah, what's the single biggest reason for teachers, not so much TAs, but teachers to walk away at the moment?
I think the way Ofsted operates has a lot to do with it, because every time we get inspected, the requirements are higher, but we're trying to fulfil the requirements with fewer people and fewer resources. And the stress I think this puts on senior leaders is absolutely enormous.
I'd agree with that, and I've set out Labour's plans for reform of Ofsted. For example, we would end those one or two word judgments. We would move to a more balanced report card that captures a school's strengths as well as identifying areas for reform and for improvement. And alongside that, annual safeguarding reviews to pick up on issues earlier than is currently the case. But I do think, reform of Ofsted has to be a big priority for an incoming Labour government. It's, again, what I hear from school leaders across the country.
Sarah, thank you, and do take care. Alan is in Purley. Alan, what would you like to ask Bridget Phillips?
I have two issues. Would you know how many children are currently in private education, roughly?
Yeah, it's about 10 million in state schools, and so I think it's under 1 million in private schools, but I wouldn't like to guess to the exact figure. I mean, my focus is on children in state schools, you'll appreciate.
Under 1 million. Let's say it's 500,000, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million. So if all those kids were to come out of private schools in the next few years because the fees go up, that would require extra resources, extra money being provided by the government and local education authorities for teachers and buildings to accommodate them. Is that right?
No, I don't agree with that analysis. So the Institute for Fiscal Studies has been very clear that in their independent research, and they are experts in this, that they don't accept this argument around the movement that would take place. What we've seen over the course of the last decade is a considerable increase in the fees that are charged by private schools, and it hasn't had that impact. And I've set out how Labour will end the tax breaks that private schools enjoy, because I want to make sure that we're putting more money into state education, which is where the vast majority of our children go to school.
I've come straight back to you, Alan, but just to clarify for people who wonder where you're headed, this is about the Labour Party plan to strip schools of charitable status, private schools, fee-paying schools of charitable status, and therefore make them eligible for VAT, which would presumably be passed on to the parents.
We'll end the tax breaks that private schools enjoy. We'll put that money into delivering more teachers into our classrooms in state schools, better mental health support for our children, and also better support for our school leaders to drive improvement and raise standards in our state schools.
Back to you, Alan.
Yeah. Hello?
Yes, back to you.
Yeah, so some countries like Germany give parents a big tax break, up to €5,000 a year, 30% of the cost of school fees, capped at a total refund of €5,000. So it seems odd that if some countries are doing this, you want to make it even more expensive for British parents to send their kids to private schools. When they are, in fact, saving the taxpayer an awful lot of money.
Private schools are increasingly the preserve of the very rich. I mean, fees have gone up so much over the course of the last decade that private schools are beyond the reach of many middle-class parents. And my focus as Secretary of State would be actually to make state schools so much better and seek to drive improvement there that parents don't even consider private education. I think why parents will consider private education, I completely understand this, is because they want the facilities, they want the resilience that comes, they want the broad education, they want their children to have opportunities. I want that for all children, and I'm determined that our state schools do that better.
My old school is... I mean, it's interesting that Alan started with the question about numbers, because my old school, which is a sort of fairly prestigious public school, the number of pupils there who are from overseas has gone off the charts, just glancing through the school magazine. The calculation you have to make is how many of these people will pay more to keep their children in these schools, and how many, like you, I sense, Alan, would perhaps have been priced out of the market if the VAT had been stuck on school fees.
In the past, lots of middle class parents were able to send their children to private schools.
My parents couldn't do it now, but they could in the 1980s.
Yeah, absolutely, and I saw that when I was growing up too. But it's way beyond the reach of most middle class professionals, most middle class families, and what they want to see is a focus on how we do better in our state schools. And as I say, the Institute for Fiscal Studies have been clear that they don't anticipate the kind of movement that the private schools lobby have been keen to talk up, often using, I've got to say, pretty bogus data to make their arguments.
But if the Institute of Fiscal Studies turns out to be wrong, I mean, we all know that forecasts are only forecasts. You don't need to be Michael Fish to remember what can happen with forecasts. What if they turn out to be wrong?
Well, their evidence, I think, is pretty robust. But actually, alongside that, we're seeing a change in demographics, which means actually there will be more places available in our state schools in the years to come because of the fall that we've seen in our birth rate.
Yes, it's especially in London, I've seen recently, schools facing closure because the number of pupils arriving. Just to pick up on this from Alan, and this I think would describe my own parents. I accept that the fees now have risen disproportionately. They've priced many aspirational middle-class parents out of the market entirely. That would apply less to day schools, for example, where you're not paying for the boarding, or some schools that manage to provide a sort of pared down private option, which is, in terms of exam results, generally delivering better results than a lot of state schools. All of that said, there are still people who are making decisions based upon prioritising their child's education over anything else, whether it is holidays or whether it is new cars or whether it is moving house. This is really awful for them. They're the ones that really are being spanked on this one. The people who've got enough money to suck it up will be fine. The people who weren't in the market to privately educate their children anyway will be fine. But the people who've decided that they consider paying for education to be more important than paying for some of the things that their friends pay for, they're in the firing line. They're in the front line, aren't they?
Look, I completely recognise that some parents will choose to educate their children privately. I'm not going to criticise any parent for seeking to do what they believe to be right by their children, but the average day school fee is in excess of £16,500. That is a considerable sum. And as you say, increasingly, we see larger numbers of children from abroad coming to study in private schools in our country. I just have to, in what's a very difficult situation where it comes to the economy, I just do not believe we can continue to justify giving tax breaks to private schools when we could be using that money more effectively.
Alan, thank you. The time is 12:46. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC with the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. If you would like to put a question to her, the number you need is 0345 606 0973. 10 minutes to 1. Julie in Suffolk picking me up on one of my lines of questioning. She writes, I think quite correctly, the vast majority of parents could sacrifice clothes, holidays, a car and live in a tent, but still never be able to afford school fees. You're absolutely right, Julie, but I speak for all when I have a senior politician in the studio. Peter is in Fairford. Peter, what would you like to ask Bridget Phillipson?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call. Bridget, about 3 points, really. An estimated 800,000 children in poverty do not qualify for school meals at the moment. To be eligible, households have to have an annual income of under $7,400 before benefits and tax. Do you think this annual income should be as low as that? Secondly, something James touched on last week was about the way we deal with meals in school, about having to rush them. We don't take our time with them. Shouldn't we give the kids, more time to eat and process their food properly? And finally, the biggest point for me is the government announced in June 2022, that the funding rate for universal school meals would be raised from £2.34 per meal to £2.41 per meal. That's a 7p increase, and many schools, that's not actually covering it, which means the schools have to find the money from their budget. Considering the cost of what food is now, how would Labour address this?
I mean, I completely understand what you're saying, and I do think it is a scandal that growing numbers of children are receiving free school meals. The Prime Minister kind of boasts about that as if it's something to be proud of, but it's a reflection of the fact that so many families are on low incomes.
Well, yeah, if they're means tested, it's nothing to boast about. But if they're free for everybody, it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I understand the argument that people make around this. I spent part of my childhood on free school meals. I'm aware of the pressures that families are under at the moment and the impact it has. That's why I've set out Labour's plans to deliver universal breakfast clubs in all primary schools so children get a really good start to the day. It gives parents options as well around work, but all of the evidence is very clear that where children get access to the breakfast club because it's about the club and not just the breakfast, it has a really big impact on attendance, on behaviour and actually on better academic outcomes for children. So that's why we've made that commitment. It responds to the cost of living pressures that families are under, but it also has really good educational outcomes alongside that. I mean, I'm looking closely at the wider discussion around free school meals, but I do have to be upfront about the economic challenges that an incoming Labour government would likely face. You know, the Conservatives had that disastrous mini budget. They crashed the economy, and we've had 13 years now of a failure to grow our economy. We need to get our economy growing. That will then give us greater opportunities to make sure that we can invest in public services. If the economy had grown anywhere near as much as it did under Labour, that would be the case.
What about that threshold of £7,400? Is that on your to-do list?
This is a really important area. I just can't make additional commitments around this, given the scale of the challenge we face. And I just want to be upfront about that. I'm sympathetic to the arguments, but I have to be upfront about the scale of what we are facing. And there will be some tough choices that we need to make about how we prioritise spending on making sure we're getting the best possible outcomes for children. It's
it is a bizarre culture in this country that we see it as fuel. You know, kids are coming through like teasmaids on a generation game conveyor belt, and they just pour something down their throat and then move on. Whereas in other countries, France in particular, it's a crucial part of the school day. That's you're not going to be able to turn that around. To pick up on Peter's second point, are you?
No, I think that I agree with that. That it is important that children get time with one another. I think especially important coming out of the pandemic because so many children, you know, those without siblings often had no access to other children or limited access to family. What I hear from schools increasingly is that because of that, it's having a knock-on impact on behaviour in schools, that children are not quite so confident in how they deal with one another, how they interact with one another. That's why our commitment around breakfast clubs, I think, is incredibly important because it gives children that softer start to the school day. They have a bit of fun together, they can have that breakfast, and it gives parents choices about getting to work as well.
And as for the £2.41 per meal, again, that you're going to tell me that's too soon to dig into the weeds on that. You could always ask Lee Anderson to help, couldn't you? For £2.41, you could get 8 meals, I think.
Well, there might be a bit more money there might be a bit more money to spend if the Tories hadn't spent so much on dodgy contracts during the pandemic and, you know, they'd wasted so much taxpayers' money.
Is there a policy on Erasmus, on rejoining Erasmus, if they'd have us?
Well, I think there is a really big issue about kind of university funding, the university sector overall. I want to make sure that young people do get opportunities to travel, to see other countries and to have access to all of that. I mean, increasingly that is the preserve of young people whose parents have got money, and that has to change. I mean, I just fundamentally believe that education is how you spread opportunity. And what I'll be setting out later this week with Keir Starmer, he'll be making a major speech around this, is that we want to ensure that your background is no barrier to getting on in life.
It's an interesting one, that, isn't it? Because I'm getting a bit of jip for defending the parents of privately educated children too enthusiastically. I was simply reflecting where the political conversation is on this. You are, because it's a very left-right divide, isn't it? You are going to be accused of holding back on aspiration, but in fact the other way of looking at it is by saying that where you are born should have as little impact as possible on where you end up.
I'm determined that we spread opportunity and that we make sure that all young people have the chance to get on in life. What we tell our kids is that if you work hard, you'll get on. And increasingly in modern Britain, that is not the case. We're going backwards. And, it will be a big priority for me to make sure that your background, where you're from, doesn't determine where you get to in life.
Peter, I think you're a governor. Do you do fundraising to supplement the food budget in your school?
No, but what happens? I mean, since becoming a governor, it's been amazing how much the school has to balance things,
yes,
and how they have to kind of come up with more money from nowhere. I think what really disappoints me is the figuring out that the £2.41 the government give doesn't actually cover the school meal. So they have to get out of their budget from somewhere else, along with everything else they have to get out of their budget with the cost increasing. I don't understand how the government can say they're free school meals when they're not free school meals.
Okay.
If someone gives you £2 and gets you to buy something for £3, you're out of pocket £1. It's not free for you then, is it? And that's what really upsets me. And the fact that I understand they can't commit to anything, but I just think any government in power should at least be able to feed our young people. I mean, they said their big issue kind of said that kind of the money kind of invested in that would actually
pays for itself 10 times over.
Economy, yeah.
No, it does. Peter, I want to squeeze in one more call if I can. Will's in Exeter. It'll have to be brief, both question and answer. Will, what would you like to ask?
James, hi Bridget. My daughter's at a special school. This is on strikes. My special school, which is basically closing on Wednesday. It's for like us with a family.
Okay, the phone line has defeated us, so I'm going to praise a special needs school striking this month. It'll be shut on Wednesday. It's going to place huge pressures and stresses on a working family. What do you think about that?
I understand that. I'm really sorry to hear that that's what Will and his family will experience. But the responsibility for this failure to get the strikes called off is on the Secretary of State. If you're not prepared to talk, and there have been no serious negotiations since April, then I'm afraid this is where you get to.
How's it going to end, Bridget? I mean, because you could equally say, and I'm sure she would if she were here, could say, well, it's up to the teachers whether they go on strike or not. So she could push the ball straight back to them.
My concern is that what we've got running alongside this is the existing strikes that will be taking place this week, but actually for the first time in their history, some of our school leaders' unions are taking strike action because they're so fed up with the approach of the current government. I think that speaks a lot to the disillusionment that's there in the profession. And I've got to say that what they will tell me is that this isn't primarily about pay. Of course they would like to be paid more. It's about how we value education. It's about making sure that their schools are properly supported. And it's about they want to do their best for the children that they are educating, and they don't feel currently they're backed up to do that.
It's 12:59. Bridget Phillipson, thank you. There's plenty of people still waiting as well. You'll have to come back. Amy and Shelley and Andrew and Bill and Laurie. Before you go, I don't get to the House of Commons very often. Has Nadine Dorries resigned yet?
Not as far as I'm aware, although I've been up to Mid-Bedfordshire to campaign already, and the campaign there process has gone pretty well.
Just watch this space. Thank you very much.
Thanks
indeed.
a lot.
You've been listening to James O'Brien and Bridget Phillipson on LBC. Tom Sawbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. 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 4.